This video is sponsored by Royal Match. And let me tell you, matching tiles has never been more fun or satisfying. I mean, who doesn't want to help out old King Robert rebuild and restore his castle to its former glory after being destroyed in the mighty Battle of 1284? I'm just kidding about that last part, but you do restore the king's castle and feel like royalty doing it. Royal Match is a completely free-to-play match 3 puzzle game that features no ads. Let me say that again in case you didn't hear me. It has no ads. You can just relax and switch off the day and play to your heart's content through all 7,000 of its levels and special events that are constantly popping up, or turn up the heat if you want to compete with your friends' scores. And honestly, I've been curious about this game for forever since I've seen it like everywhere, and I am so glad that I finally downloaded it and gave it a chance. So if you want to play a very oddly satisfying game while feeling like royalty and without any ads, click the link in my description to download the game for free today. And now, on to the video. So recently I've uploaded a lot of my thoughts on Tears of the Kingdom in different incremental videos, which was kind of dumb of me. But it's just that there are always people who would watch those and then leave a comment, and I'd want to respond to that comment, so I'd film another one and then upload that, and then there would be more comments for me to respond to, and the cycle just, kept going. But on the flip side, there are tons of people that watched one or two, but not all of them, which is kind of a bummer, because a lot of my videos I made in response to said people. So because I'm obviously incredibly intelligent, I have compiled them all into one massive Tears of the Kingdom thought video. Who knows, maybe the longer format will actually reach people on the platform. That, or maybe I'll have to sacrifice another Korok to the algorithm to appease it once more. What's another Korok, am I right? Either way, in this video you'll find my original Zelda Rant, my much longer Zelda Rant, as well as my rebuttal to one of the most popular arguments against the story in Zelda games, and 20 of my ideas on how to just fix all of this for everybody across the board located at the very end. So sit back, relax, fall asleep if you feel like it, and enjoy 2.5 hours of my thoughts on Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And I hope you're okay with my voice because there's a lot of it in this video. Hello my friends on the internet, it's me, Bandit. I hope you've all been having a great summer. Actually, it is not summer anymore, it's very much so not summer anymore. It's literally Halloween day while I'm recording this, so I have no idea why I said summer. So let me do that again. I hope you've all been having a great fall, and I hope that you've been playing a lot of video games and having a lot of fun playing said video games. I am sure you've noticed that things on the channel have been a little different recently. And by different, I mean nothing's been happening. Ever since Tears of the Kingdom released, my uploads kind of went eek! That's like a car, like just hit the brakes, like eek! It's just kind of stopped or slowed down exponentially. And there are a couple of reasons for that, and I just kind of wanted to level with you all, say hello, show my face, let you all know that I'm still alive, barely. I'm sure you can tell I've got the sniffles because it's been dipping in the temperature outside, but besides my red nose and terrible appearance, I just wanted you to know that I am alive and otherwise healthy, and I hope the same for all of you. But there are some things that I need to level with you about, and I think it's only fair to level with you about these things because it's going to be affecting the content on the channel going forward. Because, yes, the channel is going forward, contrary to what some of you no doubt were thinking. But it's going to be a little bit of a change. So, first things first, I'm just going to come out and say it. Although before I say it, I do want to preface everything that I say about whatever games I talk about in this video. I want to specify and iterate and reiterate that anything that I say in this video is just my opinion. And you would do well to remember that. And you would do well to remember that everybody has opinions. And some opinions are stinkier than others, sure, but that doesn't make them any less of a valid opinion, right? Unless, of course, you're of the opinion that, 2 + 2 = 3. But that's not an opinion, that's just factually wrong. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. If I say something in this video about games, Tears of the Kingdom, about games that you don't agree with, just let it be, alright? It's my opinion, is what it is. It's gonna hit everybody differently, so here we go. When Tears of the Kingdom released, I think that a lot of the people in the Zelda fandom were excited, obviously, for a couple of different reasons. One, it was a brand new Zelda game coming out. Well, I say brand new, right? But of course it was still in the same world as Breath of the Wild was set in. But it was a brand new experience from the ground up. With an asterisk beside that, because again, it was the same link and controls and world as Breath of the Wild. But anyway, you know what I mean. You get what I'm saying. It was a very exciting new experience. And one of the other reasons why people were so excited, for people like myself and people like undoubtedly you watching this video and you who watch my channel, it was exciting because of the lore possibilities that came with the game. Because see, Breath of the Wild was vague, right? I think that's kind of an understatement. Breath of the Wild's entire world has references to like all of the other Zelda games out there. There's no shortage. I mean, you can literally find the ruins of Lon Lon Ranch, you know, from Ocarina of Time, and you can find an entire like mostly intact shrine of whatever it's called from Skyward Sword. I'm sorry, I haven't been researching recently. My terminology is kind of gone right now. Listen, if you don't keep studying something, sometimes you lose some terms, all right? But you know what I'm talking about. Breath of the Wild introduced new lore to the series, but in a way that was still loosely connected to everything. And it was very interesting. And it worked for Breath of the Wild. And it gave rise to Zelda theories like we had never seen them before. Because people have always theorized about The Legend of Zelda. Hell, that's why Nintendo went ahead and made the timeline canon back in, the 2000s. Because the fans of the Zelda franchise love to theorize and connect pieces between games and whatnot. And you know what? It's fun. Because we fans of the series like that sort of thing. Not all fans do, but a lot of fans do. All right? And when Breath of the Wild came out, it was strangely new, but also the same. But there were certain things that were just missing. But because Breath of the Wild was the only game in this new lore continuum, if you will, it worked. We could talk about where's the Triforce. We could talk about where's Ganondorf. We could talk about, things like that, because it was just Breath of the Wild. And theories were very, very fun. And because of that, we knew that when Breath of the Wild was getting a sequel, a direct sequel, oh boy, that must mean all sorts of stuff for the theories and the lore of Breath of the Wild. We were finally going to get answers about a lot of the things that I just mentioned, Ganondorf, the Triforce. And speaking of Ganondorf, they announced before Tears of the Kingdom even came out that he was going to be the main villain. So there were so many reasons to be excited for Tears of the Kingdom and the story that it was going to bring to us. Now, I'm not going to go into all of it because, well, one, I don't want to piss everybody off because you were probably expecting me to absolutely love Tears of the Kingdom. And I think if you were to ask me that question, the answer is it's not very simple. It's complicated. Do I like Tears of the Kingdom? Yes. I think it's a fantastic experience. I think that the best way you could experience Tears of the Kingdom from a gameplay perspective would be to experience it without having played Breath of the Wild beforehand, because 90% of the game is still just walking around the same world of Hyrule. There should have been so many more Sky Islands. They should have done so much more with the depths. But again, I'm not doing a full-on review video where I just bash the things that I don't like about Tears of the Kingdom, because there was plenty to like. The crafting system, obviously, and I'm talking about the Zonai crafting system, crafting your gizmos and gadgets and flying machines and weapons and whatever, and the fuse system was really cool. But gameplay aside, did I like Tears of the Kingdom? Honestly, no. And a lot of that is on me, because as not just a fan of the series, but as a creator, specifically a Zelda theorist, I talked about all sorts of what if scenarios for Tears of the Kingdom. And the thing is, it's fun to talk about those sorts of things, but you got to be careful, right? Because you got to be able to temper your expectations. And so to me, man, the things that I focused on and was expecting to hear about, one of the biggest things of which was the Triforce it wasn't even hinted at in Tears of the Kingdom. It was just, and there are a lot more topics than just the Triforce, but I'm just using that as an example of how the lore and story of Tears of the Kingdom just did not care at all about anything that I wanted it to care about. Instead, it spent the time building up, again, new lore. The birth of Hyrule was birthed by the Zonai type new lore. And this is just another Ganondorf and another imprisoning war, and another set of sages, and another all-powerful set of relics called the Zonai Stones, or the Zonai Secret Stones. And the Master Sword can now break because of the superpower that Ganondorf has from one of these new relics. And then the Master Sword needs one of these new relics to repair itself to be able to beat this other new relic. And where's the Triforce again? You know, what Triforce? What? Golden Goddesses? What? What are you talking about? Oh, who cares about that? It's all about the Zonai. You see what I mean? Like, there was nothing in Tears of the Kingdom that I wanted there to be. And there was everything that I didn't really care about. And it's almost like Nintendo was watching YouTube, like, developing Tears of the Kingdom. And they watched our videos, and Nintendo Black Crisis' videos, and Zeltic's videos, and Monster Maze's videos, and Hyrule Gamer, and like everybody's videos about the Zonai. Excuse me. And they were like, you know what? That's good. That's really good. Why don't we just do everything in the sequel about them? And like anything that could possibly be a question of anything, just, it was the Zonai the whole time. Does it have to connect to anything in the series? No. It can just be completely new. Okay, see, now I'm ranting. And I don't want to rant about Tears of the Kingdom because, like I said, I don't want to tick anybody off. But I need to let you know how I feel about the game so that I can tell you what's going to happen to the channel because of this. Now, where the hell was I? Oh, yeah, and then, like, randomly, the director of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Fujibayashi, comes out in an interview and says, oh, it could, the birth of Hyrule could have been a new continuum, or not a new continuum, but another, like, Hyrule could have been destroyed again in the past, and then, like, it was built again in the past, and, like, the passage of tens of thousands of years doesn't matter, and hundreds of, like, here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing about Tears of the Kingdom lore, and what it proved about the era of the wild of Zelda games, so Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and I guess Age of Calamity, but it's not canon, so who cares? What it proved about them, and also a little bit about the rest of the series, is that the lore of the series doesn't really matter. It really needs to just be... I hesitate to say this because it's not true, but it kind of is. But it's almost like the lore of Zelda games need to just be handled game to game. I mean, and I say that's not true because Zelda games reference other Zelda games within the Zelda games. But when every game comes out, and especially the previous two, and just doesn't care about any of the previous Zelda games, and just introduces new stuff, and to be honest with you, it's not altogether all that interesting anymore. That very concept right there affects people like me, people who try to generate interesting topics and theories to talk about. See, I haven't been just sitting on my ass this entire time since Tears of the Kingdom came out, and I have been, but what I mean is I haven't been theoretically sitting on my ass and not coming up with video ideas. I have video ideas. This isn't a video that's crying to people to give me video ideas. There are so many. It's an entire world. Okay, there are so many things to talk about in Tears of the Kingdom. What's this person's story? What's that person's story? Whatever. And we could explain lore all day long, but here's the thing. It's not that interesting anymore. It worked in Breath of the Wild because things were just vague enough, and it was just Breath of the Wild, so we could still kind of wiggle around and make things connect and talk about what ifs. But now that Tears of the Kingdom has come out, and it's like, we still don't know what the hell the dragons are. We still don't, we still don't know where the golden goddesses are. We still don't know if this is the same we don't even know if this is the same Hyrule that has been traversed in the rest of the series. Or if it's like the new Hyrule from the adult timeline. Or like, and we don't know what the hell happened to the Triforce. Is it within Zelda? How is it within Zelda? I mean, clearly we're just writing new rules for stuff in Tears of the Kingdom. Like, there's just Zonai Secret Stones now, and they can bust things up like the Master Sword. And the Master Sword used to be more powerful than the Triforce, by the way, because Ganondorf had the Triforce of Power infuse him, literally return him from the dead in Twilight Princess, and the Master Sword was the only thing that could actually permanently kill a Triforce-empowered individual. Like, the Master Sword is all-powerful. Darkness cannot even be near the blade. And then, like, a new little teardrop stone empowers a dude, gives him Gloom, and Gloom just snaps the frickin' sword like it's a little toothpick. So like we're just writing new mythology for The Legend of Zelda that overrides everything that we've known so far. And to me, because you've got to remember, I'm a fan first before I'm a creator. The only reason why I was a creator about The Legend of Zelda specifically, and to the extent that I have been on my channel, is because it's been my favorite franchise. And why is it my favorite franchise? Because it's the most interesting. It's always been the most interesting to me. It's the most heartfelt. It's got the music. It's got the stories. It's got the lore. And it's got the themes that are the same across the games. And it's always just been so cool to me. I remember when I was a kid, the first time that I played Wind Waker, and the intro segment, like, described the events of Ocarina of Time. I was a kid. And I saw that. And that was amazing to me. I was like, wow. It's like a and that was the same Ganondorf, and then it was so much deeper now, and like you needed multiple games to kind of understand his entire story. That is cool to me, and again, that's not cool to everybody, but it's cool to people like me. It's interesting to people like me. And that's my problem with Tears of the Kingdom. And honestly with Breath of the Wild too, but more so Tears of the Kingdom. It's like none of that stuff matters anymore. A new Zelda game can come out and it can just write new rules. Like in the next game, who knows? It might just be like, there might not even be a Spirit of the Hero anymore. Or you know what I mean? Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't even know if I'm coming across intellectually at this point. I just kind of turned the camera on. I didn't really know what this video was going to be. And I'm just talking. I'm just talking about how I feel about Tears of the Kingdom. And I didn't even, my camera's been rolling. I probably cut this video down by the time you're watching it, but my camera's been rolling for well over 15 minutes. And I did not mean to make this video that long. So I'm going to stop there. But just to summarize, I don't know if I said it or not, but just to summarize what I'm trying to say, Tears of the Kingdom's story is not that interesting to me. There, I said it. So, what is that going to do to the channel? That is the reason why I'm making this video. It's going to... Basically, I'm really not going to do videos on Tears of the Kingdom anymore. And I think that's a big disappointment for me because, for years, ever since Tears of the Kingdom was teased back in 2019 as Breath of the Wild 2, the sequel to Breath of the Wild, I mean, like, everybody and their mom was looking forward to that, right? And we were all looking forward to it for many reasons, many purposes. Like, I was looking forward to having years worth of content to talk about because of Tears of the Kingdom. And then it released, and I was just like, wow, nothing really matters anymore. And then they went and said that there will be no DLC additions for Tears of the Kingdom. And that was like the nail in the coffin to me. So I covered the game with my boss lore video, because I did another one that was just focused on Ganondorf in Tears of the Kingdom. And I think that's about it. I don't know if I'm going to do my dungeon lore video for Tears of the Kingdom, because again, none of it really matters. It's all just new stuff. I mean, there was so much in Tears of the Kingdom that they could have capitalized on. Could you imagine if the Lightning Dungeon, or whatever the hell it's called, the one in the Gerudo Desert, could you imagine if that was the Resurrected Arbiter's Grounds? I mean, that's what everybody was expecting, but no, it had to be some new ancient Zonai ruins thing. Everything is Zonai. Everything is Zonai. And man, there were certain things in Tears of the Kingdom. Again, I don't know what reminded me of this. I think my brain was just going through the dungeon, and I remembered the cutscenes at the end of the dungeons, and so now I just got to mention it. Tears of the Kingdom. Like, how could Nintendo release a product that has like those copy and paste cinematics in it? You know what I'm talking about. Whenever you finish a dungeon and your helper, be it Riju or Tiba's kid, I forget what his name is, or Unibo or whoever, or Sidon. When you finish the dungeon, you are met with like the spirit of the ancient sage, and they say the same damn thing that every other one says, and your partner character says the same damn thing. Demon King, Secret Stone, Demon King, Secret Stone, and it's the same. It's the same copy and paste cinematic. Like, there's no character development. There's no... Anyway, I gotta stop. See, because I'm not trying to make this one of those videos. I'm just doing this so that I can explain to you what's happening. Anyway, I've been rambling for long enough. So, like I said, I'm really not going to be making videos based on Tears of the Kingdom anymore. Does this mean I'm going to be not covering the Zelda franchise? No, not at all. Of course I'm going to cover the Zelda franchise. I mean, like, it's the Zelda franchise. This was not enough to shake the Zelda franchise from being my favorite franchise. Although it comes close, because there are other really, really good franchises that I enjoy, which leads me to my next point. Because I'm not going to be drawing from Tears of the Kingdom, I mean, it may come up in videos, obviously, because it is a Zelda game, but because I'm not going to be drawing from it for, like, my main source of videos, I know I've talked about it for years now at this point, but it's time to branch out for the channel. Like, it's officially, it is time. So... if there is one thing that I would ask from you guys, if you're still watching this, hi to those of you who are still watching this. If you're still watching this, just comment, hello, I am still watching this down below. You know, just do that. But anyway, if you're still watching this after you leave that comment, either edit that comment or put another comment about what your favorite franchise is besides The Legend of Zelda. Not even a video idea. I just want to know, like, what you guys' favorite franchises are. I could talk about what mine are, but that doesn't really matter. But yeah, just let me know. And yeah, that's about it. That's about all I had to say. Oh, before I let you guys go, since you're all still watching, clearly, and you've all just left those comments saying, hello, I'm still watching this, you should go to a link to success... Excuse me. A link to success.com. Why? Because that's my book. Yeah, in the meantime, I've been helping Athena Hiotis, which is a phenomenal entrepreneur friend of mine that I was blessed to have met via her reaching out to me in email. But I've been helping her a little bit with some contributions in a book that she has written. She's the author, but I wrote the foreword and several parts of each of the chapters, things like that. Anyway, it's called A Link to Success. It is a Zelda book, but it's a book about finding success out of our love for the Zelda franchise. So, I highly recommend you heading over to the website and just checking it out. And if you do decide to pre-order it, I believe we are going to be meeting up and signing the pre-ordered copies, physical copies. Of course, it is also up for digital, but, you know, I can't really sign a digital copy. But if you want a signed copy of that book from the author and myself, hop on that pre-order. But anyway, that's about all I had. I just wanted to bring you guys up to speed with where I was because, you know, things on the channel have been very quiet. And I wanted to temper your expectations for what is to come. Which is, like I said, videos about the legacy Zelda games. You know, I still have the dungeon lore and the boss lore videos to complete for the other games in the series. But I'm also going to be branching out that video series to other franchises and just covering other franchises in general. All right. Sound good, team? I wouldn't blame your being a content creator as a big element to your gripes with Tears of the Kingdom too much because a lot of us feel the same way. In fact, it's really refreshing to hear you have these conflicting feelings about the game because I've been curious for a while now how the content creators feel about it. I would still love to hear more of your thoughts in a more focused video. You are definitely not alone, Bandit. I would gladly welcome a complete outpouring of your honest thoughts and conclusions on Tears of the Kingdom. Where you just rant about the game. I feel like I was the only person who was really disappointed by the game, so I'm glad to see other people. I agree with all your points, don't hold back. We are counting on you to tell us what I have said down my thoughts. It's actually so glad that you rant finally started. So yeah, we're doing just kidding. Actually, I'm not. An hour video would be amazing. Alright, fine. But, forewarning, I do get a little rambly when talking about exactly how I feel about games, particularly Zelda games. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play a little bit of the beloved game that we're talking about while I'm telling you exactly how I feel. And we'll see how this goes. I'm just going to keep the camera rolling. So if you had seen my video that I had released a little bit ago called the Zelda Rant, then you probably already know my feelings about the game, at least my feelings in general. But in case you haven't, allow me to briefly summarize. I think that it's a very fun game to play, gameplay-wise. Running around, killing enemies, you know, it's fun in the same ways that Breath of the Wild was fun. Partially, actually mostly, because it's the same frickin' world and engine and enemies and setup and goals and pretty much everything from Breath of the Wild. And that was already a fun formula, so this game is fun in the same ways, just, you know, with the added new Ultra Hand and things like that. But it is a bit lacking. And by a bit lacking, I mean quite a bit lacking in certain other ways. Some ways that a lot of people fault me for, because, you know, I'm just being a crying baby nerd with a lot of expectations, which is fair, but other ways which are rather fair, I feel, across the board. Ways like this right here. Now I'm actually going to start this video off by talking about the positive things, believe it or not, but this is still in my intro segment, so I'm gonna get this one out for free, okay? For those of you who have played Breath of the Wild, you'll probably recognize pretty much everywhere, or at least 90% of what you're going to be exploring in Tears of the Kingdom, because 90% of it is going to still be in the very familiar world of Hyrule. The surface, whatever you want to call it in Tears of the Kingdom. And as you'll probably remember, places like this are where Cass is, for instance, standing here and being Cass and having like a unique quest line for you. I forget what it is in Breath of the Wild when he's standing here, but it's like a hero's treasure thing. He's got a song. Anyway, clearly this entire area right here was built around that. Now in Tears of the Kingdom, this is a recycled area. Cass is no longer here. In fact, who knows where Cass is, but Cass is no longer here, and all we really get for retreading old ground is a Korok. Anyway, but that was just for free, alright? That was for free, just because I happened to log into my game standing here. I'm actually going to start out talking about all of the positive things about the game, of which there are many. And I have a little outline over here to at least keep myself at least somewhat aligned with what I'm trying to say. So, starting out with the good things, how it felt to play in the sky. That's what I have written down, number 1. This right here. Just this. This is what feels like a new game. This is what feels like Tears of the Kingdom. And this is what is a ridiculous amount of fun. Oops, I'm about to fall off while I'm talking here. Every island that you see off in the distance, there's no secret sauce for. There's no, like, you see all those islands all the way off over there, or maybe that one, or maybe there's, of course, I don't think there's anything above my head as far as another island is concerned right now, but that one, like, right way over there. Like, how am I supposed to get over to that island, right? You might ask yourself. There is no secret sauce. You just learn the game and the mechanics that the game has brought to the table, and you figure it out for yourself. You use your new abilities to build ridiculous vehicles or whatever, and make it there on your own. And that is phenomenal. It took the exploration of Breath of the Wild. Whoopsie. I don't know if I've gotten this Korok here. Have I gotten this? Oh, I have, okay. It took the exploration of Breath of the Wild and just multiplied it by having you not have ground in between where you're trying to get. Because on the surface of Hyrule, as complicated as it gets is just trying to climb up like a mountain or something and not having enough stamina, or maybe it starts raining and then you fall down and you can't get to where you were trying to go. That's as complex as it gets for exploration down in the world of Hyrule. In this game, there's nothing connecting us. Not only do I have to figure out probably how to climb up that island when I get there, or, you know, whatever, but I've got to figure out how to get over there first. And that's brilliant. Tears of the Kingdom's concept is a phenomenal one as far as just a damn fun to play game is concerned. And of course, one of the biggest changes, if not the biggest change, to Tears of the Kingdom from Breath of the Wild would be the addition of Ultra Hand and the removal of all of the other abilities that we had in Breath of the Wild. I don't think I have to waste video time explaining to you why Ultra Hand is so fun to use. All the reasons that you're thinking of in your head, all of the things you've created, the unholy aberrations, the unholy creations that you people watching have created in this game with Ultra Hand, and the unholy creations that I've created, are all worth it. What more is there to be said about Ultra Hand? And the other thing that was a positive and a negative for this game, but we'll get into that later, but the other thing that I really liked about this game was the combat. And by the combat, which was exactly the same as Breath of the Wild, I mean the weapons. All the different kinds of arrows have evaporated into thin air, and now what you do is you fuse them with whatever you would like to shoot. And if you want an elemental arrow, that means you fuse them with an elemental piece of equipment, or gear, or whatever. And that's cool, because now you can do a lot more with that. Now you can have weapons that have base buffs, like for instance, a Zora Spear will always have the buff called Water Warrior, which means that if it gets wet, you see how it's at 66 damage there with its infusion? Now if it gets wet, it is at 132. And that's really cool. The ability to just, I mean, their ridiculous appearances aside, like, you know, this freaking fire heart on the end of a really crappy looking sword, their ridiculous appearances aside, it's a really cool concept. I like the ability to craft my own weapons. That's the end of the good things that I wrote down. So, and I have here written down, anything else, question mark? Before I get into my complaints about the game. There were a couple pieces of new music. A few. Some of which are even memorable. So that's cool. The Colgera theme's pretty cool. Obviously, the story continuing from Breath of the Wild and giving us new interactions with the characters that we grew to love from Breath of the Wild, like Sidon and Riju, and Unibo. Those are really cool. I liked that. I liked some of the story additions. I'm really thinking, you guys. I'm really thinking. I'm trying. Oh, of course, the new areas, right? So it is cool to have... I get sad every time I see just how much empty space there is up here. But anyway, I get, you know, it is really cool to have new places to go, even though it is largely 90% the same world. It's cool to have new places to go, and even though the depths is the same in every corner, if you've been to the depths here, you've been to the depths here. If you've been to the depths here, you've been to the depths here. If you've been to the depths here, you've been to the depths here. You get my point. But it is cool to have just a lot more space to just run around, if nothing else, right? So that's very cool. But before I actually go into my harsher criticisms about it, let's just talk about the other powers that we've got real quick. So Fuse was always an odd addition to me, because Fuse is essentially just Ultra Hand. It's the same concept, they just dedicated it to its own power for some reason. Because see, Ultra Hand already sticks things together, infinitely, right? And Fuse sticks things together, and fuses them into the same item, or weapon, or whatever. It seems to me that that should have just been a feature of Ultra Hand. Like, Fuse should have just been like a sub-feature of Ultra Hand. Like, I don't see why, you know, this option that you get with Fuse right here could not also pop up if you're targeting it with Ultra Hand. It's not like it's taking up different buttons. With those two powers just being extremely similar, I almost feel like they ran out of ideas for powers to give Link, and auto build is just Ultra Hand that saves you time. But again, it almost seems like that should have just been a subcategory of Ultra Hand. I think that they should have had bombs make a return as an ability. Both square and circle. I mean, that would have taken up this slot and that slot right there. Because square bombs were like the greatest invention in Breath of the Wild. They were. Okay, bombs that would sit where you put them, I mean, mind-blowing, right? I think that was one of the most mind-blowing things about Breath of the Wild, actually. Now, if you want to blow something up, you've got to have bomb flowers. That's pretty much it. Either that or you've got to make some sort of chemical reaction that I can't think of off the top of my head. And I know a lot of people are going to talk about the time bombs, because these are technically the replacements to the bombs. But look at how large and unwieldy these things are. You know, these are not fair replacements to the bombs that we had, and we also can't make them explode on command anymore. They have to be timed. Like that. It doesn't matter if I shoot it again, it's going to blow up when it's going to blow up. So, the removal of the bombs from Breath of the Wild is a very strange feeling, but honestly, I think they might have removed them, because clearly they had a focus on removing all of the, you know, like glitches and things that people would exploit about the Breath of the Wild engine. Like, for instance, whistle running, which you cannot do anymore. People would exploit that in Breath of the Wild. The bomb jumping, people would exploit that in Breath of the Wild. So I think that they removed those probably directly to combat those exploits for movement that people would, I mean, everybody used them. I used them. But anyway, I will summarize this little bonus segment of talking about Link's abilities by saying, I like this one. I really like this one. I surprisingly really like this one. These two should have been part of this, and we should have had our bombs back. Honestly, like, energy-based bombs that you can decide when they blow up, one of which is a cube, should be a staple of the Zelda series, and that is a hill that I will die on. They should reappear in the next game, and that is a hill that I will die on. Okay, with all of that aside, as the sun is setting, thematically, it is also setting on the positive things about the game. And you might be wondering, Bandit, you were being positive this whole time? Yes. Yes, I was. So let's get into it. Speaking of the Sky Islands, which we are standing on perhaps the most unique one of them all. You remember how just a few minutes ago I pulled up this map and I took a look at it and I was like, oh wow, look at all that empty space? Yeah. Yeah, look at all that empty space. When I first started playing this game, I was, oh boy, I was excited. I mean, everybody was, right? And this is where you start. Spoiler alert, sorry if you didn't know that. I don't know why you're still watching this if you didn't know that, but this is where you start. And it kind of teaches you how to play the game, the same as the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild. And then you make your first descent down to Hyrule. And you ascend your first Skyview Tower. You go up in the sky and you get your first piece of the map, and it's empty. It's all empty except for that island you were already on, but you think to yourself, okay, that's fine. There are other places in the sky that are going to be much more cluttered, I'm sure. Much more densely packed with sky islands and content in the air, I'm sure. And little by little, every time that you go up a tower, or at least this was my experience, every time you see something like this. Just 2 or 3. And that's it. And your heart begins to sink little by little. And not only are there really not that many sky islands in the game, where there should have been, like, it should have been mostly new sky islands in Tears of the Kingdom, because that's what really feels like a new game and that's what's really fun. Not only are there basically not any, but a lot of them are just copy and paste. This island right here, this little quadrant thing with the little quadrants. Okay, that's one of the only unique ones there because it also has a temple to deal with. Oh look, there's the quadrants. Oh look, there's a quadrant. Oh look, there's a piece of the quadrant. Oh look, there's another quadrant. Oh wow, look, what is that, a quadrant? Another quadrant? Wow. Oh look, there's more quadrants. Like, in every single corner of the map, there are copy and paste islands, and there are copy and paste, like, platform islands. There are even a couple copy and paste globes. Oh, and even the flying labyrinths. They literally just took, and I don't know if you can see, like just blink back and forth, but these flying labyrinths, which are just flying for no freaking reason, and which are just, they are duplicates. Like, literally, you pull up this labyrinth object file in something like Blender 3D, and just Control-C and Control-D. I'm sorry, I forget how to duplicate in Blender. It's been a couple of years now. But you just duplicate the entire model and put it in the sky, and that's what they did with these. And then they were like, you know what, that's cool, that's content. This is content. This is content that people are asking for in Tears of the Kingdom, absolutely. And there are a few unique islands in the sky. There's the Great Sky Island. There's the 2 temples. There are the 2 temples up here and their associated islands. There are the bravery and courage, and those islands where you fall down, even though they're all really similar to each other with the same concepts. But there are those, and then of course there is the Thunderhead Isles, which again leads to a temple. So there are the 3 temple-leading islands: the Great Sky Island, the Quadrants, the Spheres, the Copy-Paste Labyrinths, and the Falling Islands. And honestly, I think I've just summed up... Oh, and the Copy-Paste Platform Islands. And honestly, I think I've just summed up all there is new in the sky. Now, I'm not trying to, like, stomp my feet on the ground and bang my fists on the desk and just be an absolute child about things and just complain because I wanted more, blah, blah, blah. But I am going to do that a little bit, actually. Because, listen, this was a $70 game. Okay, this was a $70, this was a new experience that was being sold to us. You want to know what they did in their last $70 game, or $60 game, or whatever? All of that. All of that. Okay? And you cannot tell me that they ran out of ideas for Sky Islands when they created all of this. Do you want, like, just recall with me, back in Breath of the Wild, or even this game if you want, how every single, like, in this segment right here, there are probably like 5 secrets. In this segment right here, there's probably 12. In this entire quadrant of the map, there's probably 100, 200. That's probably not even scratching the surface. I don't know how I died there, but anyway, that's probably not even scratching the surface. The creativity that we were expected, that we had gotten used to from Breath of the Wild, was astounding, staggering. I mean, it won Game of the Year easily because it was so big and complex and intricately detailed. And then in Tears of the Kingdom, like I keep mentioning, the actual new content that everybody was excited for was that we were going to the sky. Nobody really cared about yes, we were okay with revisiting the same world of Hyrule, sure, because it's a big, wide open world, and a lot of us felt like they could have done a lot more with it, because really, the whole world of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild was sparsely populated, but only with like one of 2 things, a shrine or a Korok seed. Basically. There were a few other things, but basically that was the overwhelming, like, that was their content that they filled the place up with. And so we were okay with a return to Hyrule, given that it would bring more to the table. More unique bosses around the place, more unique items around the place, the return of dungeons maybe. There were several different reasons why we were excited to return to Hyrule. But one of the biggest things was that we were excited to go to the sky. And this is what we got. I don't know how to, like, I'm not going to sit here and calculate, but I would be willing to bet, just looking at this and looking at this, that the total surface area of actual new content in Tears of the Kingdom, actual new land surface area content, would be probably less than 10%. Probably. Just eyeballing this right here. Probably an absolute maximum of 10% of the land volume that we were used to in Breath of the Wild. And I know what you're thinking, but Bandit, look at that. That's an entire other map underneath Hyrule, and it's just as big as Hyrule. Well, like I was saying earlier in the video, I admire Nintendo for keeping the depths a secret for as long as they did. Like, I really, really admire Nintendo for like, nobody thought, even a little bit, that there was going to be another entire world down under. And they hit it. They hit it really well. And boom, everybody was subscribed. Wow, everybody should be subscribed watching this. But no, everybody was surprised when this happened. And when we first would fall down in the chasms and fought giant frog monsters and whatever, like, that's a beautiful thing. I'm not gonna lie. The depths, they could have done so much more with. So much more. And I'm gonna go into this a little bit, just here in a second. But, excuse me, there aren't even tough enemies down here. Like, there, at the end of the game, you're still gonna be running into, like, red bokoblins down here. Truly, ultimately, even though we have these Sky Islands and the depths, 90% of the game still takes place right here in the same Hyrule. And like I was just saying, we were okay with that. We were excited about that even, because there were a lot of new things that they could have done with this Hyrule. But here's what they did. The towers are back, just different, in roughly the same locations, but not quite. Shrines are back. In fact, there are more of them to do. And Korok seeds are back. In fact, there are more of them to do. Literally, quite literally, the same stuff from Breath of the Wild. They just brought back. Just a little bit differently. Of course, the shrines are... I'll be honest, they had some really fun puzzles in shrines in Breath of the Wild, and they have really fun puzzles in shrines in Tears of the Kingdom. And if I were to say which ones I preferred, I'd probably say the ones in Tears of the Kingdom, because Tears of the Kingdom's sandbox with Ultra Hand is a lot more open. You can just, you know, it's truly open. You can combine anything to anything and really exploit the physics system. So I liked the shrines in this game as far as shrines are concerned, but I would have traded half of these shrines for, I don't know, anything else. One of the other things they did do is they added a whole bunch of caves. But 90% of the area that you'll be traversing in this game is the same Hyrule, and 90% of what you're going to be doing in the same Hyrule is the same stuff. Going to a tower, solving a shrine. So that was also kind of a letdown. Oh, you know, not to kind of flip-flop back and forth, but one of the other things that I forgot to mention that was a positive about this game would be some of the new enemies that they brought into it. I really liked, and notice I said some because they aren't all new enemies. The vast majority of the enemies are still the copy-paste enemies from Breath of the Wild. But the Phantom Ganons, hello, those are cool as hell. I really enjoy fighting those scary hands. The Froxes were a welcome addition, and the Gleeoks, of course, were a welcome addition. In fact, you know what? Speaking of Gleeok, I'm just gonna go over there and kill the one that's on the bridge. Why not? But I've got pretty much nothing bad to say about any of the added enemies. The bosses that were new for the dungeons, I like them about as much as I liked I liked that they were at least their own species and their own monsters. But, I mean, I liked them about as much as you would like, you know, the different Blight Ganons from Breath of the Wild. Which, by the way, are also Phantom Ganons. And I know that I previously was praising the combat, kind of, for giving you a lot more customizability. I mean, look at this. I have a flower shield. Like, you guys, I have a flower shield. Do you have a flower shield? I didn't think so. Unless you do. But mine's cooler, obviously, because it's my flower shield. And I love my flower shield. I wouldn't trade my flower shield for the world. Of course, I can't do stuff like this with my flower shield. Oh, I can. I actually had no idea that I could shield surf with my flower shield, because typically you can't when you fuse something on there. But either way, I like my flower shield. It's cool. The ability to fuse things is cool. But here's the other aspect to that. You know how in Breath of the Wild everybody was complaining about, oh, weapons breaking? Like, everybody was complaining about weapons breaking. Even people who defended that mechanic admitted that it was kind of a, you know, oh, why is my thing blinking? Stop telling me where ore deposits are. Yeah, turn off. But like I was saying, even people who defended this mechanic still thought, you know, I just realized that I'm trying to multitask this and I'm probably going to suck at multitasking. But here, you guys are gonna see the greatest way to kill a Gleeok. And you're gonna be so impressed. Seriously though, why are you so mad? What did I ever do to you?
I sometimes try to see if I can hit 2 of the heads in one go, but that never really works out for me.
Where are you going? Here, take one of these with you! Oh, you're too far up. Oh, what's he doing? What are you doing? Oh. Well, that's big. I forgot how big that is. It's been a while since I've killed one of these. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you die? I didn't notice you were still alive. But anyway, it didn't happen in this fight. I was kind of hoping that it would happen just so I could complain about it a little bit. But when your weapons... Because, okay, so here's the thing. A lot of people were hopeful that with the addition of fusion on your weapons and the ability to do stuff like this, destroy your fused material, a lot of people were hopeful that you could repair your weapons and keep your weapons and stop them from breaking so often and having to say goodbye to your good weapons, and therefore promote, you know, a healthier use of your weapons rather than trying to only use your weakest ones pretty much all the time and trying to save your big ones pretty much all the time and never really using them. But that's not the case. Your weapons will still break all the same in Tears of the Kingdom. It's just that not only is your weapon still breaking, you also fused something to it. And here's why that kind of sucks. Because not only are you breaking one weapon now, you're breaking one weapon and one material. And a lot of these materials you also need for your gear upgrades. So you're having to spend not just weapons now, but basically it's a double whammy now with weapons. So not only do you, yes, you do get to craft custom weapons, and that's really cool, but the toll is much higher now, because now you're burning through your materials and weapons. Like, I'd be okay if when you fuse it, the material on the end would break, and you could keep the base weapon. That would make a lot more sense to me, but that's just not the case. Everything breaks. And the Master Sword being able to, like, fuse whatever onto it, and, like, it looks really cool with the runes, but, you know, kind of transforming into and taking the characteristics of whatever you fused onto it is a strange touch, but it's pretty cool, though. It makes sense, because in that way, like, if I were to have fused, you know, a blunt, like a mace thing onto the Master Sword, not only does he swing it like a mace instead of like a blade, but it can also mine much easier, etc, etc. So the fusion system for weapons is a good thing and a bad thing, like I was saying. Oh yeah, and the like the return of the likes was pretty cool too, I'm not gonna lie. But again, if you've been in one cave, you've been in them all. So it's they kind of did the same thing that they did with all of the world and level design in Breath of the Wild in with caves in Tears of the Kingdom. That is to say, is that warm enough? Okay, cool, that's warm enough. That is to say, they brought a new concept in, the caves, which is cool. It's a cool concept in and of itself. Can I go down here? Yes, I can. It's a cool concept in and of itself, but they didn't do that much with it. If you've been in one cave, really, you've been in them all. Now, the depths, on the other hand, like I said, this was a very welcome addition to the formula of Breath of the Wild that nobody was complaining about. And I'm like 90% sure that they were inspired by Elden Ring. Because if you'll recall, one of the delays was announced shortly after Elden Ring came out. And Elden Ring has this phenomenal moment in it. I don't know if any of y'all have played it, but if you've been on my channel for long, you know that I am a huge fan of Elden Ring. We'll be covering it when the DLC drops. I've covered it before on the channel. But Elden Ring is a beautiful, beautiful game that I have, like, nothing bad to say about, really. And it has a beautiful moment in it where you go down this elevator in a well, and you're like, ooh, what little chasm or catacombs is this going to lead to? And it just keeps going down and keeps going down. And then everything in front of you opens up, and you see a new starry sky, which is really like just the roof of the caverns, but it looks like stars because it's all sparkly. And it's a whole other world down there. A whole other world. And it just opens up. And then, like, the text on the screen pops up, you know, and it's like, CO for a river, or I forget, you know, what the area is called. But anyway, it's a beautiful moment, and I'm pretty sure that Nintendo was inspired by that with the concept of the depths. Now again, just like I said with the wells, the depths were a new concept that they brought up, but didn't do all that much with. And just like the wells, if you've been in one part of the depths, you've been in all of them. Because there's always a mine nearby that has zonite. And there are always zonite ore deposits around that have some really, really, really ridiculously weak enemies guarding it. And that's about it. I mean, there are a few unique kind of quests to do down here. Don't get me wrong, the design of the depths is cool. But one of the things that they did decide to do with the depths that I am cross with them about and will likely not forgive pretty much ever would be, in every single mine, there's a chest. And inside this chest is either 100 Zonai charges, which you will use to upgrade your Zonai batteries, or, get this, a DLC or amiibo item from Breath of the Wild. Just stuck in a chest down here. Fans of Breath of the Wild who picked this game up, which is the vast majority of people. I mean, that's why this game sold 10 million copies in the first 3 days. It's just an insane, insane turnout. Is because everybody from Breath of the Wild was really waiting and nipping at the bud to play this game. When that's the only reward for traversing every corner of the deep, dark depths, the only reward that you get is a chest that has the Tunic of the Sky in it, or whatever, or the Majora's Mask in it. Like, that's a cool little Easter egg, same as it was in Breath of the Wild, sure. Cool to wear around and kind of show off, sure. But there's no, it doesn't inspire a drive in you to go and figure out what's in each chest. It's the same stuff from Breath of the Wild, and speaking of the same stuff carried over from Breath of the Wild, practically everything is. Now, they did give us from here downward some new gear. But again, that stops right here, and it goes right back to all of the same gear from Breath of the Wild. And then, of course, the Ancient Heroes aspect. I read a lot of comments online asking people why they're upset that a lot of the armor sets and music and enemies and gear and weapons are reappearing from Breath of the Wild. They get upset and they say, it's a sequel. What did you expect? When have you ever seen a sequel to debut with 90% the same gear? But I'm gonna stop talking about gameplay stuff now, because that's debatable. I mean, all of this is debatable. This is all just my opinion, and I can't believe I've been recording for nearly an hour now, and it's taken me this long to say, hey, this is just my opinion. Really, honestly, I shouldn't have to say that, but you know, it's the way the internet is these days. A lot of people, a lot of you watching will respect this as my opinion, as you should. And, you know, even if you disagree, but there are some of you watching this right now who are just very, very, very upset that my opinion differs from yours. And all I'm saying is just understand that if you disagree and you feel differently and you loved everything that I said that I didn't love, or will be saying that I didn't love, that's fine. I'm telling you right now, that's fine. You can still be my friend and I can still be yours. Take this thumbs up as proof of that, of my friendship. Because this isn't something that fandoms should divide over. I'm just letting you know how I feel. Because I also have read a lot of comments saying that the internet is a very lonely place if you don't find people who agree with you. And honestly, I agree. So that's why I'm doing this. For you guys to find solace in my opinion, and for me to find solace, for my opinion, in you guys. So really, honestly, I'm done talking about gameplay right now, because what's more important than the amount of Sky Islands, the shape of the Sky Islands, oh yeah, this was a cool addition. Man, I wish they had done more with, like, giving Link powers in this game, because this was actually really, really cool. Being able to do what Yiga people do. But anyway, what's more important than any of this to me is the story. And damn it, that's what they let me down with the most in this game. So let me start out by saying that Tears of the Kingdom started off extremely strongly. It started off with a bang. This cutscene right here was everything. It was perfect.
What's that?
Finding Ganondorf, everything was so mysterious. But he's going to say something here in just a second that I'm going to really zero in on. And I want you guys to pay attention to, because it was so... just chef's kiss, and it could have been so much more than it ended up being. So this right here is the first thing that was extremely intriguing to me. The fact that something could shatter the Master Sword. This blade can stand up against the Triforce, by the way. It can kill a Triforce-blessed individual. In Twilight Princess, it's shown to be able to do that.
My power cannot save you from me.
And that's the thing, like, I agree. So what's his power, right? What's this new grand power? This is what I was talking about. This is what I was talking about. Can I pause this? No, I
Placed
can't.
his faith in
Okay, so I'm just gonna back out of this because it goes on for quite a while longer. But that right there, when Ganondorf says Zelda and you who carries that sword are Link, listen, none of us knew that this was going to be a closed time loop story by the time when we were just playing this, okay? So when Ganondorf looked at Zelda and Link and recognized them, do you know how insanely cool that felt? Because for the first time, it felt like he recognized them because it was the same Ganondorf from earlier in the franchise. For those of you who are new to the franchise, from Breath of the Wild, Ganondorf has been a big baddie since the days of Ocarina of Time. Technically since A Link to the Past. Because that's when we had figured out that Ganon used to be a man known as Ganondorf Dragmire, if you were to have read the A Link to the Past manual that came with the game. And then in Ocarina of Time in 1998, the big bad dude actually came out swinging. And man, he has left a lasting impact on the gaming world ever since his first appearance. Wind Waker came out and his appearance just got cooler. It was the same Ganondorf, but we're fighting him untold years later. The original world of Hyrule has been swallowed underneath the waves and he's back. He's going to resurrect the old world because he always wanted it for his people. You know, so his story got deep. We love Ganondorf. And then he died at the end of that game and in the end of that timeline. And in the child timeline, of course, he had an appearance in Twilight Princess. A little bit less to say about him in that game, but still a cool appearance. And then we said goodbye to him for 17 years, and now he's back. And he's been slumbering and creating Ganons this whole time, right? So a lot of us were thinking, oh, this is him from the Fallen timeline. He's been here the whole time. He recognizes Link and Zelda from Ocarina of Time. Or from A Link to the Past. Or from, you know, A Link Between Worlds or whatever. Like, he recognizes them. Oh my goodness. Or, you know, it felt so cool to have Ganondorf, of all people, directly talk about the timeline in a Zelda game. But of course, we know that that wasn't the case. He only knew who Zelda was because Zelda got sent back in time, removed from the situation immediately, exactly like Breath of the Wild. And he knew Link's name because Rauru practically whispered it in his ear before he sealed him away for countless millennia. Or however long it was, excuse me. Which is significantly less impactful. And speaking of Ganondorf's impact, there wasn't any. I was just talking about how deep of a character Ganondorf has been this whole time, and some of y'all might not have even known that. Some of y'all might have thought that Ganondorf was just a stereotypical video game baddie this whole time. But for a lot of people, you know, or at least the ones who like to read in between the lines and whatever, Ganondorf is deeper than just that. And really, honestly, we have his Wind Waker appearance to thank for that. We also have his Ocarina of Time appearance because the first time he saw Link, he was impressed by him being courageous, and he spared the little Link's life. And then he grew to regret it, of course, 7 years later, when Link grew up and kicked his ass. So, like, Ganondorf has always been, like, you can see him respect other people, you can see him have human thoughts, you can see him have human nobility, like in Wind Waker. He's a cool villain, people love him. So to bring him back, and also I'm not talking about the Four Swords Adventures Ganondorf, because, I mean, let's face it, Four Swords Adventures lore is kind of weird, but anyway, to bring him back, but it's a new Ganondorf, and then to give him absolutely no background or no backstory at all, like literally the first time we see him is right here. After the start of the game, of course, but this is all the backstory we have. He's already mad. He already wants to take over Hyrule, but you might be thinking to yourself, "Oh, that's exactly what he's done in the previous games, right?" Not necessarily. He wanted the Triforce in the previous games. He wanted the ultimate power in the previous games. He wanted the wish in the previous games. In this game, he just wants to take over Hyrule. Just because. Happens to see this Zonai secret stone on Rauru's wrist. Just because. He has one moment of feigning depth to his character, and it's at the very end where he says, I must destroy all my enemies. That is what a king must do. That's as deep as it gets with this Ganondorf. To say that that was a letdown, to say that it was a monumental letdown, to me, would be a massive understatement. Because he was one of the biggest pulls for the game when they revealed that he was going to be in this game, and he had this new design that was just so kick-ass looking. I mean, oh my god, right? But it's just nothing. It's just a big old nothing burger. And we can come up... That's the thing about, like, talking about the lore of this game, is we can come up with whatever backstories we want to as fans, but it's all so equally... It's all just fan fiction at this point. Like... The difference between fan fiction and a theory, in my opinion, is that a theory should be at least marginally more believable. A theory should be actually, you could see that functioning that way. A fan fiction is just writing whatever the heck you want. Just writing whatever story you want. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to fit with anything. And I need to move on from Ganondorf, because if I keep talking about the letdown and what they could have done with Ganondorf, we'll be here for forever. And I've already talked a long time, and I still have quite a bit to get through. Another problem that I had with the story of this game was the fact that it did not really follow up on its continuity from Breath of the Wild. So the biggest, and I'm just gonna come out swinging with this point. One of the biggest things, right, differences between this game and Breath of the Wild is the lack of all the Sheikah technology. That's not the same tower from Breath of the Wild. The towers from Breath of the Wild, the guardians from Breath of the Wild, the Sheikah slate from Breath of the Wild is just gone. Just gone. And we had a lot of theories as to why that happened, but recently Fujibayashi, the director of both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, came out in an interview, and really the interview's not new, but it was just released to the public recently. And I say recently, it was probably like a month or two ago at this point. But in that interview, he says, and you probably already know what I'm about to say, in that interview, he says that the Sheikah technology just up and disappeared, and nobody knows why. I don't even know how to go into that, to be honest with you. I don't even know how to go into why that is the most... I apologize, but I don't apologize. Why that is the most asinine explanation of all time. Like, what? The Sheikah technology just knew after the calamity was defeated that its purpose was done, fulfilled, and so it just decided, okay, that's it. That's it. I'm going on vacation. I've done my duty. So I was just in a podcast with Ratatosker and Monster Maze, who I'm a pretty good friend with. And you should go check that out, because if you're down for complaining about Tears of the Kingdom, there's a lot more in that podcast. But in that podcast, we talked about this, and Monster Maze brought up the point that if the Sheikah technology was just waiting for Calamity Ganon to be defeated so its purpose could be fulfilled, then why did it not do that with the original Calamity Ganon that the Sheikah technology was built for 10,000 years ago? You see what I'm saying? Why now? It's almost because Nintendo just knew kind of what they wanted to do, but they didn't know how to connect it to Breath of the Wild, so they didn't. They just didn't. And I mean, I could go into a lot more, but it just comes down to a whole bunch of things from Breath of the Wild just not fitting very well. Like, people don't act like they were just under the actual threat of extinction, like, what, 4 or 5 years ago, or however long it's been in between both games. They act like they don't even know that that happened. Like, do you not see the world still in ruins? Do you not know how that happened? Do you not want to ask how that happened? Like, what is going on? And then there are people who just don't remember Link. And I get it. Some people, like random NPCs, if they don't remember Link, really, it's whatever. But I'm talking about the people that are a bit more important to the story. I'm talking about people like Hestu. You know Hestu. He's the big Korok dancer dude. How many times does Link go to talk to Hestu in Breath of the Wild? A lot. Or all of the Koroks, for that matter. How many interactions does Link have canonically with Koroks in Breath of the Wild? A lot. He even canonically goes and gets the Master Sword, because he starts Tears of the Kingdom off with the Master Sword. So canonically, as of the canon events of this very game, he has entered the Lost Woods, and he has met the Koroks and the Deku Tree, and he has obtained the Master Sword. So why do they act like they're meeting him for the first time in this game? The first Korok that you go talk to is like, what? You can see me? Bruh, I just found 900 of you people. I drew this sword. I come to the Lost Woods every Tuesday for brisket Tuesdays. Alright, and we share meat. It's a meat fest. Like, what do you mean you don't remember me? Do you see what I mean? That just doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit. And everybody had a whole bunch of expectations for Tears of the Kingdom's new story. We were all a bit tired. Like, it worked for Breath of the Wild the way that the story was all in the past. We didn't really accomplish much in the present game. All we really did was figure out what had happened in the past. Oh, come on, Link, you can do it. Get up the hill. But that's all. But that worked for Breath of the Wild. But in Tears of the Kingdom, we were all ready for something new. We were ready for something that was going to be eye-opening and something that we were going to be able to play through rather than just kind of figure out that happened in the past. But they did the exact same thing in this game that they did in Breath of the Wild. Zelda gets removed from the scene immediately, goes in the past, and lives that whole time until the present, creating all of the different teardrops around the place and creating the story that we once again have to piece together because we don't get to play through it. It's a tired formula, but one that they copy and pasted because they could not deviate from the concept of Breath of the Wild that was a non-linear story. They wanted to accomplish another non-linear story that you could just do in whatever order you wanted. So to do that, once again, they sacrificed a story that you actually play through with your own two hands. And just like my ancient Breath of the Wild review that I don't even know if it's still on the channel, but just like that one, I questioned whether it was worth it for the sake of good storytelling. Also, anybody who's watching this, you better not dare question my building prowess. This is the greatest vehicle you've ever seen and you know it. You can't climb stairs either, okay? Stop coming at my vehicle. I'm just kidding. I know you can climb stairs. Oh, where do you think you're going? You're not off the hook yet, buddy. We got bridges to cross and all sorts of things to complain about. And again, I could sit here and harp on the story over and over and over, but you get the point, right? You get the point. Can your vehicle do that? I didn't think so. Like I said, best damn vehicle in the world. A bomb flower? You shouldn't have. I was running out. But you get what I'm saying about the story. I mean, nothing from Breath of the Wild was explained. Like, we still don't know who the three dragons are. We know that if you swallow a secret stone, you become a dragon that looks really, really similar. So, you know, who swallowed the secret stones to become those dragons, huh? Since the Zonai are so... And we still don't know who the hell the Zonai are. Where'd they come from? Are they aliens? Do they literally come from off-planet? And why did they take an interest in us? Why did they leave? But why did two of them stay behind? What? Why? Why? Just so many things to wonder about. But, you know, since they're just so mysterious and all-knowing and all sorts of, you know, jargon, whatever, then who's to say that they weren't, like, the golden goddesses aren't Zonai themselves? And who's to say they didn't swallow their own secret stones and become those three dragons that are clearly named after them? Farosh, Naedra, Dinral. What if that's literally, you know, Faror, Nehru, and Din? Like, that's a ridiculous notion, of course, but is it? Is it really? The Zonai are clearly all-powerful, clearly choose their own sages, clearly can come up with secret stones that can give people powers, some people powers that can shatter omnipotent relics like, you know, the Master Sword. Like, what? Where's the Triforce? Where is it? We didn't know where it was in Breath of the Wild. Some people were convinced that it was in Zelda since, you know, the symbol flashes on her hand, but people like me are not convinced with that. People like me need to know why it's just resting in her bloodline now, instead of literally being an attainable relic, like it's always been. It's only ever rested in people's bloodlines when it was separated. When it needed protection, it would choose people as protectors, and they would be imbued with powers. Power going to Ganondorf, wisdom going to Zelda, courage going to Link. If it's all in Zelda's bloodline now, why? And what point is that? And shouldn't that mean that she's all-powerful now? Because the completed Triforce grants wishes. Ultimate wishes. And if it's not in Zelda, which I don't believe it is, where the heck is it? And of course, the biggest one, how do these games fit into the timeline? Do they even fit into the timeline? Is this a new continuity? If it is a new continuity, why do some Zora writings reference Princess Ruto from Ocarina of Time? Why does creating a champion talk about Ocarina of Time's events as the distant past? Why do we literally see some of the temples from Skyward Sword spread around in Hyrule? And why is everything that's everything, that's anything, that is anything ever, Zonai? As I was saying in my original rant video, it's like Nintendo was watching our videos about, oh my god, don't you dare, you know what, no, nobody hurt my vehicle. Anyway, as I was saying, what was I saying? Where was I? What am I even talking about? What is anything? Oh yeah, I was talking about the fact that everything is Zonai. The history of anything is Zonai. Hell, there are even flashback cutscenes on the Great Plateau where the Temple of Time, like, there's a Zonai Temple of Time, which in and of itself is just so weird. But in the flashbacks, the Zonai Temple of Time was on the Great Plateau where the current Temple of Time is. And if you don't believe me, I'm not going to edit it on the screen, or maybe I will if I feel like it. If you don't believe me, look it up. Like, figure it out for yourself. I'm not lying. The Zonai Temple of Time was where the current Temple of Time is. And the current Temple of Time, I guess, was built afterwards in the same spot by Hylians for some reason. Why? I don't know. I don't know. Everything is so hard to explain because nothing is explained. And everything is Zonai, which is just the dumbest explanation and the most easy one that you could ask for, and I don't know a single person who's satisfied with that who actually cares about the story. And what it leads to is everything being just so gosh darn uninteresting now. Everything, nothing matters anymore. And it's sad. Don't you fall off. Don't you frickin'... Oh, you did. It's okay, I still love you. I still love you. But nothing really matters anymore, and you can... Like, it might matter to a few of you watching this, but literally just look up, like, Google Trends, or look at the amount of lore videos being posted about this game, as opposed to before the game released. Like, it has completely killed the hype behind wanting to know what's going on in this universe. Because it doesn't matter anymore. Because everything is so convoluted, it's either way too complex to explain, or it's not explained at all, or both. Somehow both. It's a new concept that this game invented. I don't know, you guys. I feel like I've sufficiently... What the... Epona? Epona? I guess I had left Epona here from, who knows how long ago, but hi, girl! Hey! Such a good girl, just staying there, not moving a single inch from where I left you. I was always coming back for you. I swear I was. Don't you believe anything else? Don't you dare believe anything else. And see, now that I'm riding on top of Epona, I have to change stuff around. Hold up. This is tradition. This is tradition. There we go. This is right. This is right. And if you don't see the value in this right here, then I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, I could go on and on and on and on, but I feel like I have, in this little ramble session, I say little, but it... Honestly, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You asked for this, so here it is. I think what I want to do is I want to talk about why this happened. Like, why Tears of the Kingdom released and people got disappointed in it. Like, why was Tears of the Kingdom created this way? Well, to be honest with you, I think that the success of Breath of the Wild and the style of game that Breath of the Wild is has a lot to say about why Tears of the Kingdom came out as essentially a copy-paste version of that game. See, right after Skyward Sword released, if you remember, those of you who have been in the franchise, or in the fandom for that long, a lot of people hated Skyward Sword. And, you know, it's disappointing, of course, because Skyward Sword is a really good game. Story-wise. But gameplay-wise, it was a bit lacking. Not many people liked the mechanics with the motion controls. Not many people liked the backtracking that you had to do to get through places or to go back to the same area to do the second dungeon in the same area. And when you were just trying to do that, to have like a segment where you're captured by the goblins and they take all of your stuff, like nobody liked that, right? Or the people who did are very, very few and far between. So Skyward Sword was complained about quite a bit. And Nintendo, if they've ever done anything, it's they listen to the fan base. Now, they might not always come up with very good corrections based off of what they read from the fan base, and sometimes they overcorrect. But if there's one thing they do, it's they listen to feedback. They've done that with all the previous Zelda games. Wind Waker was too cartoony. And so they went the complete polar opposite way with Twilight Princess and made the most dramatic, realistic-looking Zelda to date. In fact, in the files for Wind Waker... Oh, is there like an army up here? I don't really want to fight an army. But anyway, in the files for Wind Waker, or for Twilight Princess, it's called Wind Waker 2. Like, seriously. And it has the Wind Waker object in there. So it was supposed to be a sequel to Wind Waker. But they listened to fans and thought, you know what? What they want is something more mature. So after Skyward Sword, the biggest complaint that they could hear was that Skyward Sword was too linear. Too trapped into going here at this point and going there at this point and whatever. So in Breath of the Wild, they completely released everybody so that you can do exactly what you want to do when you want to do it. Doesn't matter when, doesn't matter where, go in whatever direction. The only thing you have to do in Breath of the Wild is complete the Great Plateau segment. After that, after you have your paraglider, who knows? The world is your oyster. Crack it open. The biggest and most popular Zelda game to date, when you take into account the 3D release of it as well, or the 3DS release of it as well, is Ocarina of Time. Besides the Breath of the Wild and onward. So before Breath of the Wild, it was Ocarina of Time, right? Zelda games had been living in Ocarina of Time's shadow ever since, and every game after that was an Ocarina of Time-like game. And then Breath of the Wild came out, reinvented the wheel, and they were very much so rewarded for it. I think Ocarina of Time plateaued around 14 million sales across all versions. Breath of the Wild is above 30 million currently. So this non-linear break works, right? So Nintendo did exactly the same thing with Tears of the Kingdom. And they didn't want, and that led to all of the complaints that I've been talking about with the story and whatever. Personally, I don't see a problem with doing that necessarily. But I think that they could have handled it a lot better. I think they could have written a story that was more cohesive with Breath of the Wild. I don't think it's that. Some people act like it's so difficult to maintain a non-linear open world format and write a good story. Like, I've literally read comments that are like, I don't know what you want from them, man. Like, I don't know what you want Nintendo to do. Like, do you want a good game or do you want a good story? You gotta choose. Why do I have to choose? Why? Is it that difficult? Is it that difficult to write a story that meshes with its own previous lore? News to me. And I disagree. I fundamentally disagree, because if it was that difficult, then the fans wouldn't come up with such great fan theories and fan stories that are all significantly better than anything that happened in this game. And I think they should have taken a lot more care into characterizing the new characters that they came out with. Like, for instance, I don't care about the ancient sages, especially after those ridiculous, god-awful copy and paste cutscenes from... Can you actually rewatch them here? No, I don't think you can. Those copy and paste cutscenes every time you finish a dungeon, you know what I'm talking about. I don't even know what to say about those, to be honest with you, because it's like, that's just ridiculous. Like, that is just asinine. To release a game where multiple actors say the same lines about the same concept. Demon King, Secret Stone, Demon King, Secret Stone. Literally. Literally. Asinine. Asinine. That is so far below Nintendo expectations that I'm very disappointed, and I will probably never forgive them for that one. So clearly they should have spent more time crafting a good story rather than coming up with what they wanted to do with the gameplay first and then trying to fit a story in around that. They should have come up with the new story first and then tried to fit the gameplay around that. They were already going to get the sales. It's the sequel to Breath of the Wild. And speaking of new characters, I feel like they should have introduced more new characters. I don't think that bringing Ganondorf back was a good idea. I'll just be honest with you. I think that the series has been screaming for a new villain for a while. Like, why is it that Nintendo had to outsource the Breath of the Wild prequel game, Age of Calamity, which is non-canon of course, but Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, why did they have to outsource it to, who is it, Konami? I don't know who does the Hyrule Warriors games, but in order to get a new villain for the Zelda series, Astor. Like, the Nintendo team couldn't come up with a new villain? And you know what, Astor was pretty cool. He was characterized pretty cool. Actually, to be honest with you, the story of Age of Calamity is pretty cool. But again, it's essentially a fan story that people just wrote up. And because of that, it's non-canon. Because see, when you create new characters and you write new stories for these new characters, no old weird fans like me have expectations for these characters. All of my disappointments in Ganondorf were because he's not as cool as the other versions of Ganondorf. But if it was a new character, why should I complain about that? I don't know to complain about that. You could create a new bland character and I'd just be like, oh, okay, whatever. And it would be at the very worst neutral. But now that you've brought Ganondorf back and made him bland, now it's a negative. You see what I mean? Come up with new characters. Because then at the very, very worst, at the very least, they'll at least be uninteresting. But not a negative. Anyway, I feel like I've said my piece about this game. I could go on, I could write a script and follow a scripted review, but I don't know. When it comes to reviewing games, I'm not a professional. I've not really done this that much in the past, so I felt like just turning the camera on and just talking to you guys, if that works. And if you're still watching this right now, you know what, just like with the Zelda Rant video, I really am not expecting anybody to still be watching this. Oh, I don't have a bow, of course. But if you are still watching this right now, leave a comment saying, shoot that Wizrobe. No, don't leave that comment. Say, nice shot. If you're still watching this, say, nice shot. Then I'll know. Then I'll know. But anyway, if you are, thank you for still watching. I just... After reading the feedback in a lot of the comments from my Zelda Rant video, I knew that I had to do something like this. And I had to just level with you guys about how I felt about this game. And kind of explain more about my thoughts behind my disappointment with Tears of the Kingdom. Look, a restless cricket. I wonder where I've seen that. Look, a Yiga soldier. Oh, look, he's dead. I wonder where I've seen these people from. Oh, look, a duplex bow. I wonder where I've seen that from before. You get the point. You get the point. So with that, you guys, I feel like I've said all I need to say. I feel like I don't need to go into this subject anymore. I feel like I have explained my thoughts behind the Zelda Rant video. And just to reiterate and recap, I mean, you can still go watch that video if you want more of me rambling. I don't know why anybody would want that, but if you want more of me rambling, you can still go watch that video. But just to reiterate what I said there, I'm probably not going to be covering Tears of the Kingdom exclusively anymore in videos at all. I'll still cover Zelda, don't get me wrong, but it'll be, you know, Legacy Zelda games. And of course, Tears of the Kingdom will probably come up in those videos, but this is not going to be a Tears of the Kingdom channel. It's not going to be a Breath of the Wild channel. This is going to be a gaming lore channel, like I've always wanted it to be. And it's going to incorporate other franchises, Zelda included. And speaking of which, let me know what other franchises you want to see covered. In case you missed it, there were a lot of people who asked for Metroid on the Zelda Rant video. I did start off with a boss lore video for Metroid Prime. So check that out. I'm actually really proud of that one. And that's it. I have here, the last thing that I have written on my little outline over here is going forward, what would I like to see in the Zelda franchise? And that's something that actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I would like to ask you guys. I know I keep asking you to write comments, but listen, there's no shame in leaving multiple comments on my video, alright? I guarantee you I read them. But going forward, what would you like to see from the Zelda franchise? And of course, I will weigh in on this as well. I would still like to see practically the same things that I talked about at the end of Breath of the Wild. I would still like to see a return to dungeons, true dungeons, not these short little... See, I haven't even gone into what I thought about the dungeons. Maybe what I need to do is just live stream and talk about this stuff, you guys. So maybe I'll live stream. If you guys like that, add that in to your thoughts about the future of the Zelda franchise. If you would like for me to schedule a live stream where I talk about just... Maybe I'll just walk around in this game and talk to you guys about it. But anyway, I'd like to see a return to dungeons. I'd like to see a return to at least a somewhat linear story. Like, if the story was like Skyrim, like if the open world was like a Bethesda game where there is the main storyline that has to be progressed through with the main characters, like, and there are, but it's still open world, so, you know, you can progress as you want to, and there are side quests and whatever. I would prefer that we do that. Which is really what Zelda has been since the days of, like, Ocarina of Time, to be honest with you. Like, that's exactly what Ocarina of Time was. That's what Twilight Princess was. That's what Wind Waker was. That's what Zelda has been. Honestly, I want to see a return to that. Just in a world like this. And honestly, the world doesn't really have to be this big again. Like, they don't need to bust their butts making a world this big every single time or bigger. They could go to half this size, to be honest with you, and that would be more than enough. But I would like to see a return to, oh lord, oh no, it's a big bad Hinox. Also, another thing that I don't get with this game is why there are still regular level enemies everywhere. It makes it really hard to find good horns when there are still red level enemies, like, all over the place. You know what I mean? You know what I mean. Well, easy peasy, I didn't even get to see his health bar. But you see what I mean? This is the end of the game, and I'm still encountering enemies like this. That, to me, that shouldn't happen. That should have been a much harder level enemy, with a lot better loot, to be honest with you. But, whatever. I rest my case. So yeah, I'd like to see a return to dungeons. I'd like to see a return to the story. Or to the kind of storytelling. I don't mind if they introduce new things. I don't mind if they introduce something else that can also break the Master Sword in the next game, or if they introduce another blade entirely. I don't mind, so long as it's a good story. That's it. Okay, that's it, you guys. I'm done with this subject, and just in time to finish my monster. That's to all of you for making it this far. Go enjoy some video games. Go enjoy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. Got a lot more gaming lore videos to come. I'll be reading your comments to look at whatever franchises you guys want to see on the channel. And yeah, this is not the end, you guys. This is just a new beginning, okay? This is the start of something really, really cool. Oh, look, he's looking at his hand. I guess that's one other new thing they added to the game, is a new idle animation. But anyway, this is the start of something that can be really, really cool. All of us venturing off into new franchises together. So let's do it together. If I started writing a book series called The Tale of... Let's call it The Tale of Zebulon. And I wrote one book, and then I wrote another and called it The Tale of Zebulon 2. And then I wrote another, and then another, and then another, and they're all called The Tale of Zebulon something. 3, 4, 5, The Tale of Zebulon, Essence of the Void, whatever. And within those books, I had references to the other books that came before it, or maybe hints about books that might come in the future. You look me in the eyes and tell me that you would not think those books are connected. And whose fault is that? It would be mine, the author's, right? So here we are again. I know I keep making these videos. This is the third one of these ramble rant type videos. And after I went live with those videos, it really opened the door for a lot of commenters to come at me with a lot of arguments. And I am a creator, but I'm also a person. You may have noticed. So I would like the chance to defend myself. A lot of people watching right now And even if this isn't you watching, then I'll tell you that these people exist. A lot of fans of many franchises, but specifically for this case, fans of the Zelda franchise, get upset at people for being upset with Nintendo for the way that they've handled the lore in recent games. And that's fair. It's fair to have differing opinions. It's fair to care more about one thing or less about another. There's no problem with that. I take issue, though, with the argument that specifically Nintendo never cared about the timeline or never cared about the lore in their Zelda games, and that was entirely on us, the fans, back in the day, theorizing and whatever. We forced Nintendo to create a timeline where they never wanted to do it, but we held a gun to their heads and said, you connect these games or else we're not buying your games anymore, or whatever. And that's what I'd like to debunk in this video. And a couple disclaimers. Number one, as always, I am a rambler. Apologies in advance. And number two, there will be spoilers in this video, probably, maybe not. But here's a theoretical spoiler warning for you. You're welcome. So really, this argument that's been brought up about Nintendo not caring about the Zelda timeline is not a new one. It's been there for the entire time that my channel has been a thing, really. I've seen these on every timeline video I make, or every time that I even remotely criticize the lore in the Zelda franchise. I see these comments just popping up, but recently they've been popping up all over the place, not just because of the ramble videos that I uploaded, but also because there was a recent interview, another one, that came out with the same people, Aonuma, the producer of the Legend of Zelda series, and Fujibayashi, the director of both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. It's a new interview with Game Informer, and it's a really cool interview. They're just asking about, what they're going to do with the future of the franchise. They actually say something really cool in the interview. They say that Aonuma says that he refrains from commenting on an Ocarina of Time remake, which could mean that it's just such a tired subject he doesn't want to talk about it, or obviously the elephant in the room is it could mean that they are working on an Ocarina of Time remake, which would probably effectively break the gaming world for a little bit. But what I want to focus on is, let me find it real quick. They were asked pretty directly about the timeline. Here it is. When you're developing a new Zelda title, obviously your primary focus is on core gameplay, but the timeline placement discussion has become more important and prevalent among the fans of the series. How much consideration and importance does the development team put into those discussions? So clearly there have been enough of us, I guess, at this point, talking about the timeline and talking about the lore, that even places like Game Informer have taken notice. And Fujibayashi's answer is as follows. As you mentioned, we realized that fans have a great time theorizing and enjoy thinking about where things fit on the timeline. Cheers to that. That's something that the development team recognizes and it considers, but to an extent. And I say to an extent because if we get too into the weeds or too detailed in that placement, it results in kind of creating restraints for our creativity. The process of creating new ideas becomes restricted because we're so tied up and trying to make this fit into a very specific spot in the timeline. We do consider it, but not to an extent where we feel that our development process feels restricted or constrained. There you have it, folks. Right off the bat, we've got the answer from the word of God, Nintendo themselves, saying that Nintendo does not necessarily care about the timeline anymore. And that much I agree with. When Link's Awakening came out, the remake, it swapped its positioning on the official canon timeline from after the Oracle games to before, if I remember correctly. So that's actually something that I agree with. But what I take issue with is the notion that they never cared about the timeline, or that it's the fans' fault for making the timeline a thing in the first place. In the first place, if you are the kind of fan who says that Nintendo never cared about the Zelda timeline, honestly, you are kind of ousting yourself a little bit, as either a fan who hasn't been here for all that long, or a fan who has been here but hasn't really been paying attention. From the get-go, the first Legend of Zelda was much more detailed with its storytelling than a game, its sister game of Super Mario, or Donkey Kong as it originally was called, obviously. In Donkey Kong, Mario, formerly known as Jumpman, just scales a tower and saves the girl from a big monkey. In The Legend of Zelda, Link has to venture around and find secret caves and has to find upgrades to weapons and other items to use and battle all sorts of different kinds of monsters and go through dungeons in whatever order he feels like, and then retrieve the Triforce and battle against a giant pigman demon and then save the princess. It has a story in its loading screen, and if you have a Nintendo Switch with the Nintendo Switch Online subscription, fire up your NES, launch The Legend of Zelda and just wait for the loading screen to start playing. It reveals a story to you. So right off the bat, The Legend of Zelda wanted to tackle a more fantasy setting with a story. Zelda 2 came out, and it was a sequel to The Legend of Zelda. A sequel to a game is a game that comes after a game. That's a timeline. And really, the timeline of Zelda games was all centered around Ganon back in the day. The first Legend of Zelda dealt with defeating Ganon. Legend of Zelda 2, or I'm sorry, just Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, dealt with preventing his resurrection. A Link to the Past was the first Zelda game where they decided they were going to do kind of a prequel. Because A Link to the Past is kind of a origin story for Ganon. It explains where Ganon came from in the manual. That had never been done before that point. You even read that his real-life human name used to be Ganondorf Dragmire. So the fact that there was the same villain who had become this demonic, two-legged pig demon who you can read used to be human in the booklet for the game meant that it was really supposed to be a prequel. And people put those dots together. They connected those dots. Link's Awakening came out, which was the same kind of thing that Zelda 2 was to the original Legend of Zelda. Link's Awakening was a sequel to A Link to the Past. It was that Link from that game continuing his adventure. Then Ocarina of Time came out, and we got a prequel to A Link to the Past, because now we got to see Ganondorf Dragmire, and then we legitimately get to see Ganondorf become Ganon. And if you're following me so far, it's really not that hard to explain. The games keep coming out and they're kind of prequels. The original Legend of Zelda was always supposed to be kind of the most futuristic one. They kept coming out explaining the history of Ganon in some other way. Fans connected the dots because there were dots to be connected, placed there by Nintendo. But then, as you know, Ocarina of Time is where things got kind of funky, because at the end of Ocarina of Time, the timeline splits. And they always knew the timeline was going to split, and we have two evidences for that. One, Wind Waker. The beginning of Wind Waker directly explains Link popping into that timeline when he drew the Master Sword in Ocarina of Time and popped into the adult timeline, and then popping out of it after he defeats Ganon. That is directly explained in the intro segment of The Wind Waker. And the second thing I wanted to talk about were the several different interviews from the early 2000s/late 1990s, where Miyamoto and Aonuma both talked directly about the Zelda timeline. In 1999, Miyamoto was asked by an interviewer and this interview was included in apparently the original Ocarina of Time booklet. He was asked, before it was released, Nintendo announced that this new Nintendo 64 Zelda could unlock the mysteries of the entire Zelda story. Could you tell us about that in your own words? To which Miyamoto responded, maybe mysteries was a bit of an exaggeration, but you do learn the story of where the Triforce came from, and it is meant to be episode 1 of the Zelda saga. The basic order is Ocarina, then the original Legend of Zelda, followed by A Link to the Past, which obviously is not really how the Legend of Zelda timeline as we know it today is laid out, but back in the day, that was Miyamoto's understanding. In the same interview, he goes on to say that on the importance of story and continuity between the games, right now our highest priority is to create an interesting game, first and foremost. Sometimes that means not worrying about the joints not lining up perfectly, which is inevitable anyway. Excluding really obvious big breaks in continuity, we ignore the little inconsistencies. This interview explains both points. It explains that, one, it's true. Miyamoto and co. were not super concerned about making sure everything lined up. However, he was concerned with making things line up in the big picture way, in the big timeline way. He goes on to say, for that reason, I've often been accused of not caring about the story, but when I consider the medium of video games, above intra-series continuity, it's far more important to me that the player is left with a satisfying aftertaste once the experience is over. And only to that extent do I care about continuity, in that huge breaks with canon or previous games would make players feel betrayed. And we don't want that. As you can see, he directly talks about the fact that a lot of people do accuse him for not caring about the story and only caring about experience. To which he responded essentially, kind of, mostly, but not entirely. He does care about experience first and foremost, and he's a freaking visionary. He came up with Mario, he came up with Zelda. We need people who think about experiences first and foremost, obviously. But part of that experience to him, as you just heard, is canon, continuity. He says, once again, huge breaks with canon or previous games would make players feel betrayed, and we don't want that. What I'm trying to say is that Nintendo themselves created the timeline. That's all I'm trying to prove here. It's both, right? Of course, a lot of people were clamoring to figure out the secrets of the timeline. Back in 1997, when they were giving commercials for Ocarina of Time, that's when they said unravel the mysteries of the Zelda franchise. Excuse me. And there were only 4 games out before then, and they were all pretty easy to understand as far as fitting in between one another or whatever. And they did make the choice to name each of them Zelda games, so they knew that people were going to be trying to connect them one to another. They're the ones who created that situation, and I know I keep repeating this. I feel like I've repeated that 20 times, but I'm trying to say it to where you will hear me. Nintendo created the timeline. They wanted to. Now, they did not want to put all that much of an effort into making it consistent 100%. Me personally, this is where I kind of don't understand what's up with that a little bit. Because to me, I feel like those don't have to be 2 separate concepts. You don't have to only focus on experience of a game or whatever without focusing on the story and the lore or whatever. Or vice versa. You don't only have to focus on the story and the lore and then you just have a boring game that doesn't matter or whatever. The argument that was brought up in the recent 2023 interview with Aonuma and Fujibayashi and Game Informer, that Nintendo would be constricting their creativity, restricting it within the timeline if they focused on it too much, is, I think, a little flawed. Because if you think about it, is The Legend of Zelda not already a constriction? Their universe that they created, is that not already a constriction? The fact that they will not make Zelda playable after decades of people asking for it, is that not already a constriction that they are refusing to push through? They will not give up the balance of Link and Zelda and evil, the balance of the 3 forces. Is that not a restriction? But within that restriction, they've been able to come up with some pretty damn creative concepts. I mean, Zelda herself has been how many different things across the franchise? Sheik, Tetra, Hylia, and then obviously all the unique things that happened with her in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, all within the restriction of no playable Zelda, and Zelda not being an immediate part of the story the whole time, and playing through large portions of the game without her. They can focus on working within restrictions and working within preset patterns. It just has to be one that they want to focus on. And for some reason, they don't want to focus on the timeline. And if I may critique Nintendo just a little bit here, I think that's a little illogical. Or not illogical, but a little uninspired. Because, listen, if you give an artist a blank canvas to work with, or if you give a writer a new franchise to work with, whatever is written, whatever is drawn, whatever is painted, whatever colors they use or don't use, whatever, all of it is 100% creative, is it not? Because there was nothing there before. However, if you introduce restraints and restrictions, and then give someone the liberty to create something based off of that, in my opinion, that's what inspires true creativity. And to be honest with you, I also find it a little hard to believe that it is just that difficult. It's just that difficult to write a story within the constraints of the universe that you've already created. I mean, Middle-earth does it pretty well. Star Wars, well, okay, maybe not Star Wars, but Metroid, the Metroid franchise does it really well. It's not impossible. You can create one continuous story. Honestly, the Zelda franchise has the perfect setup for it. They just snap their fingers and 100 to 10,000 plus years will just evaporate in between games. You can do so many different things with that. You can leave Hyrule, go to a different land. I don't even have time to get into the thousands of fresh creative ideas that can be implemented while into the Zelda franchise while working within the constraints of the established lore and the established universe. So to me, that's a choice from Nintendo that I don't necessarily understand, but I digress. Just to recap, all of my rambling has really made 2 major points. 1, Nintendo did create the timeline. Whether or not it was from goading from fans or whatever, Nintendo created the timeline. And 2, Nintendo already restricts themselves in other ways, just not with the timeline apparently. And honestly, I don't think the timeline was all that difficult to understand. Initially, there were only supposed to be 2 timeline splits off of Ocarina of Time, with Ganon being created, and then as Miyamoto explained, with it then going on to lead into the original Legend of Zelda, and then Zelda 2, and then A Link to the Past, and then Link's Awakening. And that's pretty easy to understand. And even once Majora's Mask came out, things were still pretty easy to understand because there was a split at the end of Ocarina of Time into the child and adult timelines. But as time went on, they didn't want to leave Ganon and Ganondorf as villains behind. And they kept making games with him as the villain, which became harder and harder to interpret into this timeline that at one point was pretty easy to understand. And for the games that were the most difficult to understand, like A Link to the Past, especially since Ganon is said to, or is shown to be defeated at the end of Ocarina of Time in both timelines, once they placed A Link to the Past in the Fallen timeline, and then all of the other games that they couldn't explain their timeline placement also in the Fallen timeline, I think that's where all of the tension started to come from. Because the Fallen timeline doesn't make sense, and I've talked about this before. Adult timeline, child timeline, those are legitimate splits that you can understand because of the end of Ocarina of Time. But the Fallen timeline is another reality. It's the reality where Link dies at the end of Ocarina of Time. He's not able to defeat Ganon or Ganondorf, depending on which one he's fighting at the time. Obviously, if you have beaten Ocarina of Time, then that is not canon, but the fact that the Fallen Timeline exists means that it is canon. So that's why things started to get, I feel, a little icky. And for a lot of people who saw that and saw that it didn't really make sense, they started to be much more vocal about the fact that, oh, it's the fans' fault. It's not Nintendo's fault. Nintendo would never make a mistake like that. It's the fans' fault. The fans are the ones who created the timeline in the first place, and the fans are the ones who are now messing it up. And that is why I made this entire frickin' video, just to prove to people once and for all, to point back to this video whenever these comments inevitably come up in the future, that yes, fans were excited about the timeline and connecting the dots in between games because there were dots to be connected and because there was a timeline as proven in the 90s from Miyamoto, but fans are not the ones who messed it up. I think the fatal error was making the decision to include a timeline in The Legend of Zelda, but not actually focus on it. And going forward for game franchises, I think that if you're going to create lore, I think that you need to make a decision off the bat if you're going to pay attention to that lore. Because if you're not going to, why even make a sequel in the same game series? Just make a new franchise. It's been nearly 40 years. I don't think they're ever going to drop the name The Legend of Zelda, but I think that they should drop the timeline, personally. I think they should drop the continuum. I think that they should put their money where their mouths are, because in the Game Informer interview, in this interview, they were asked, does the Hyrule we saw in the flashback scenes in Tears of the Kingdom predate Skyward Sword, or does it come after the other games in the timeline? And this is one of the most infamous answers that they gave in this entire interview. Fujibayashi says, obviously there's something a bit clearer in our minds, but of course it could be that we're wrong as well. I kind of want to pose the idea that, like in real life history, you define by the artifacts and by the data that you currently have. And I wasn't aware that, real life history is just so malleable, but apparently it is. So within what we have, there might be a correct answer, but it could be a different answer. So I guess my answer would be that it could be both. Both could be correct. And Aonuma chimed in and said, The Legend of Zelda is a series of games that focuses on puzzle solving. So this is just another sort of puzzle that the users will have to see if they can solve and think about. For people who are diehard fans of the lore, that might be a frustrating answer because basically they threw their hands in the air and went, I don't know, doesn't really matter. It's up to people to think about. But honestly, I'm not mad about that because that's what I'm saying should happen. Drop the timeline. Let the fans who care about the timeline come up with the timeline and work with it and just have a fanon timeline. Because at this point, the dozens of timeline theories out there work a lot better than what is canon, especially since it switches around and especially since the very creators of the series and developers of the series themselves say, really, it's up to the fans to interpret how they want. So I think they should put their money where their mouth is and do that. Drop the canon timeline, stop these arguments between or among fans about whether or not Nintendo cared about it in the first place or whatever, and just let us write it ourselves. So anyway, that's it. I just wanted to make the final of these Ramble trilogy videos about responding to what began with Tears of the Kingdom criticism and what is now ending with timeline criticism. Again, I would like to reiterate, I love The Legend of Zelda as a franchise. It is my favorite gaming franchise to date. I love Breath of the Wild. I really liked Tears of the Kingdom. Nothing wrong with loving either of those games or not loving the franchise as a whole. There's nothing wrong with whatever opinion you have right now. And there's nothing wrong with my opinion, but I just wanted to set the record straight. So I made this video. But of course, as I'm ending, I want to just ask you people, what do you think should happen with the Zelda timeline? Do you think that it needs to be redone by Nintendo? Just reoriented with official placements for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom finally, and maybe even other non-canon games like the Hyrule Warriors games placed on the timeline finally? Or do you think that do you agree with me and think that they should release the canon timeline back to the fans? Put their money where their mouth is, like they say in interviews, and let us figure it out. Let me know in the comments below. I'm probably not going to do another one of these ramble-type videos for a while, unless there's a topic that I feel passionate enough about. But if you're still watching, thank you so much for watching. Just like I've done with the other two videos, here's my little test for you. If you're still watching, say my favorite Zelda game is, and then with your favorite Zelda game, in a comment below. You can also comment whatever else you want under that, but make that the first line, if you're still watching. The Legend of Zelda is in an odd spot at the moment. It's not broken per se, but it is very different from what the series used to be. And because of this, we've got fans on the one side defending it to the death, and we've got fans on the other side attacking it to the death. Now, watching my recent videos, you might think I'm one of the latter, but you'd actually be surprised. My take on the current state of Zelda is quite simple. I defend the parts of the games that I like, and criticize the parts that I don't. There are definitely fans on either side of this argument that are much more passionate about their sides than I am. But no matter what side you're on, if you're watching this right now, you can breathe a sigh of relief. Big Bandit's here to fix all this. I believe there exists an idea for the next Zelda game that, if implemented, would appease both attackers and defenders of the current Legend of Zelda. 20 ideas, to be specific. Let us begin. Number 1, I think it would be a good idea to rework the current weapon system. I've never been one of those people that absolutely despises the weapon system that was introduced in Breath of the Wild. I think that this is a fine concept in and of itself. I think that a lot of other open world games use the same kind of durability concept for their weapons. I just think that it could be massively improved upon. I think Nintendo needs to rebalance it from the ground up. I think that more powerful weapons need to be a lot more rare to find, and consequently, I think that weapons need to have a lot more durability, just on average. I'm not saying that every bokoblin out there that's carrying a bokobat should no longer drop their bokobat. That would be unrealistic, and I actually like the fact that if you can see an enemy using a weapon, they drop said weapon. That's a great gameplay mechanic in my opinion. What I'm saying is that there should be a lot fewer more powerful weapons out there. Giving players fewer, more powerful weapons would make those weapons a lot more valuable. And subsequently, I think the same kind of thing could be implemented for Tears of the Kingdom's new weapon system, which is to say the forging system. I love it personally. It's just simple enough to keep things fresh. I just think, again, that they could do a lot more with it. Maybe multiple items can be fused into a weapon. Maybe there can be more effects than what we've currently seen. Maybe some items fused onto a weapon can repair that weapon. Some items fused onto a weapon can increase its durability. Or you can combine a durability increase with an electric mushroom, something like that, to zap your enemies but also keep your weapon for longer. The possible combinations would be endless. But speaking of new combinations and new weapons, what if the new Zelda game introduced new weapons entirely? So in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, there are 3 kinds of melee weapons. One-handed, two-handed quick, and two-handed slow. And yes, Link will swing them at different speeds or maybe slightly differently, depending on like if you have a blunt weapon as opposed to a sharpened weapon, but that doesn't change the fact that there are only 3 very basic weapon types out there. I would love to see Link able to wield, of course, spears and swords, but what about bigger swords or smaller swords like daggers? What about dual wielding? What about hammers? Or a giant mace? What about a ball and chain or a smaller handheld one called a morning star? What about a whip? What about new kinds of bows like great bows? Or crossbows? And here's a thought that I'll kind of go into a little bit more later on, but what about introducing new legendary weapons for Link to wield? What if, for instance, you could stumble across Ganon's trident, and these other legendary weapons would grant special abilities? And I know I've been rambling about weapons for a while, and trust me, the other points on this list are not going to take nearly this much time, but weapons is such a broad subject, I really needed to just put all my thoughts out there. The last thing I'll say about it is, I think that weapons should be repairable. I think this is something that people have complained about since Breath of the Wild in 2017, and it's definitely something that should have been an addition to Tears of the Kingdom, which was not, sadly. I understand that Nintendo felt that being able to repair your weapons would hurt the mechanic that they were going for, which is continually just keep exploring, keep finding weapons, keep swapping to new ones, and whatnot. But if you implement a durability mechanic, that could accomplish the same thing. Sure, you might have a great weapon, sure, you might really like using that weapon, sure, it might have cost you an arm and a leg to get that weapon, but once its durability hits 0, you can't use it anymore. Gotta go get it repaired. And in the meantime, you have to find the other weapons that you've picked up. It could work, it should work, and it would definitely help fix the next Legend of Zelda for everybody. Next up, speaking of reworking things, I think that the entire eating mechanic in Zelda should be reworked. I do enjoy the addition of Link being able to eat things in order to regenerate health and achieve different status effects, but we've got to be honest with ourselves. The moment that they introduced health regeneration as a solely making Link eat things mechanic, they removed collecting hearts. And this might be my nostalgia talking, or it might just be the argument of a different style of game, but I kind of miss having to look for hearts. Furthermore, I think that giving Link the ability to just pause the game at any point and eat 1 million apples at any given point and regenerate unlimited amounts of health was kind of a change for the worse. It made things a bit too easy. The only real way that you'll get killed in this game is if you fall off of something or if something hits you hard enough. In the older Zelda games, if you were really struggling with a fight and you were out of potions or you just couldn't find any hearts around you, all the pots were gone, the grass was gone, the smaller enemies to kill for hearts were all gone, then you were kind of out of luck. But it's tricky because I, on the other hand, do enjoy all of the various cooking and effects that Link is able to get from eating things in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So what do we do in the next Zelda game to implement maybe both of these systems? Well, I'm glad you asked. For one example of how to handle this, I would like to reference Genshin Impact. Now, for those of you who have played the game, you probably know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't, in Genshin Impact it has a very similar pause the game, eat something to regenerate your characters' health mechanic. However, your characters can't just eat a million things at any given point. They have an appetite, and if they're full and can't eat anymore, then they're full and they can't eat anymore. Therefore, it's a hard cap on how many things you can stuff down the gullet of your characters. It is a little odd that Link can eat 500 apples, 200 mushrooms, and 3 multi-course meals in any given instant. I mean, I'm sure he's got a fast metabolism, but that's a little freaky. And maybe we could flesh this out a little bit more. Maybe not all meals are created equal. Maybe a smaller, just chicken on a stick meal could take up this much of his appetite, but a full course, big, grand turkey could take up this much of his appetite. And the effects would differ as well. This only regenerates 1 heart, this regenerates 5. And in the meantime, you could also find hearts in grass, pots, or on minor enemies all over Hyrule. I could see it working very well, actually. And potions, on the other hand, could not take up any appetite because, you know, you can always drink, right? Number 3, and perhaps the most obvious of all of them, we need a new map. Traversing this current land of Hyrule has been fun, and it's so big and so vast that they even used it again in Tears of the Kingdom, just with some added sky islands and an added depths area. The Legend of Zelda has always had a day-night cycle, or at least ever since Ocarina of Time. But you know what none of the Zelda games have ever had, and I'll get a bit more into this a bit later on? They've never had seasons. And I think this is because there have always been the winter areas, the summer areas, in the same map of Hyrule. What if there are multiple maps that you can travel in between? Multiple states, if you will. And here's another thing about the new map that we're going to need going forward. Should Link's Spider-Man climbing ability return? If you think about it, it affects everything. It affects how intricately Nintendo designs every single angle of their maps. It affects puzzle design and many more factors of the game. Personally, I don't think that it's necessary. I have enjoyed climbing ever so slowly up the side of whatever in the world I wanted to if I had enough cooked Stamina shrooms in my bag, but at the same time, there is an irreplaceable mechanic that is lost when anything can be scaled. It's the very mechanic that they inject back into the games whenever Link does a shrine, for instance. Nintendo just said, nope, you can no longer climb in here because if you can climb over everything, that ruins like half of the puzzle ideas out there. So I see there as being several benefits to removing Spider-Man climbing for Link in the next Zelda game. Nintendo can take more time to focus on designing other elements of the game, or they can take more time to design more map in general, while not necessarily having to design it with quite as much verticality as they did every single inch in the current world of Hyrule. Another slight thing that I would like to see in the next map, wherever it may be, Hyrule or not, is the addition of wandering bosses. Think about it. We've got world bosses already, and they've been implemented very well. You can target exactly where a Gleeok is, exactly where a Hinox is, exactly where a Stone Talus is. If they do roam, it's within their little section. I understand that that might be more difficult in general, but it would be pretty cool. It would make the world feel really alive. For an example of a game that accomplishes this very well, think of Elden Ring. And yes, Elden Ring is a significantly more difficult game than Zelda ever has been, but the concept could still be implemented, I think, in a way that's not quite as inaccessible for casual gamers. Number 4, another very big one that's close to my heart. Bring back pieces of heart. I understand why they removed pieces of heart from the game, because they wanted to make a purchasable system for heart containers and stamina vessels, which worked. But let me paint you a picture. Imagine you walk into a village, let's call it Kakariko Village, and you walk into a house, and in the corner of this house, there's a cage. And inside the cage is a cow and a piece of heart. It's right there. You can't enter the cage, though. How do you get it? You're left to wonder and puzzle and think outside the box. And this isn't even a dungeon puzzle. This is just in the world of Hyrule somewhere. That very scenario that I just painted is one of the most famous pieces of heart to collect in Ocarina of Time in Kakariko Village. And it is a staple of the Zelda series. Something being dangled right in front of you, just out of reach, that you'll have to think very hard about how to get to. And I think that they could be added back to the next Zelda game, even if Nintendo wanted to bring back this multi-hundred shrine setup that they have loved since Breath of the Wild. Let's say there are 200 new shrines in the next game. What if at the end of each of them, they don't each give you the same thing, an orb of blessing or an orb of light or whatever they're called, but instead, some of them will give you a piece of heart, and some of them will give you a piece of stamina, and some would give you other rewards entirely. Very rare weapons, very rare potions, rare pieces of gear, and they could also add back in pieces of heart in the world of Hyrule at large. Put one in a tree, have a flying enemy around carrying one in their talons, and you gotta figure out how to get up to it and knock it down, and leave the solution up to the player. Adding pieces of heart back into the game could work so easily, and should work, and would still appease all kinds of fans out there. Number 5, one of the most requested things since Breath of the Wild came out, the return of dungeons. I know what you're thinking, but Bandit, didn't they bring dungeons back in Tears of the Kingdom? No. Well, they did, I guess, but, you know, they were just the same as the Divine Beasts, and I guess you could call them dungeons. But when people ask for the return of Zelda dungeons, they're talking about much longer experiences that are much more notable, much more memorable, with a lot more puzzles involved. But I'm not just slamming my fists on the table like an old nostalgic fan saying, "Bring me back what I was used to, I don't like this new stuff." I'm here to tell you, what if they brought back dungeons in a new way? Here are a couple ideas branching off of that seasons changing idea that I had a little bit ago. What if some dungeons were ephemeral, which is to say, temporarily accessible? Imagine there's a dungeon on top of the frozen icy mountain, and you can only access it in the spring, summer, or fall, because in winter it is way too cold to go up there. The entire pathway is just iced over, and believe it or not, Link can no longer just climb up the side of frozen freaking ice anymore, and it's way too cold for any fire to melt it. Or what if the dungeon underneath Death Mountain is only accessible in the winter? Because in the spring, summer, or fall, things are just way too hot. Link's skin sets on fire just trying to enter the area. Or, get this, what if there's a temple that just so happens to be underwater that's only accessible in the spring or the fall? Maybe this lake that it's positioned in is in between Death Mountain and the Icy Mountain, and in the summer it's too hot to enter the water, and in the winter the water freezes over. And that's just one element of ephemeral dungeons. There could be dungeons that slip in and out of time, there could be dungeons that slip in and out of reality, there could be dungeons that will levitate into the sky for some jargon lore reason. I'm just saying, if you brought in ephemeral dungeons, that would shake things up quite a bit. And here's another way to implement new dungeons. Do you know what a roguelike is? For those of you who don't, a roguelike game is a game that's essentially a dungeon crawler, but every level that you enter has randomized enemies, and therefore randomized loot that is temporary for that run. You get as far into it as you can, and oftentimes there is an end, there is a last level, a last boss, and that may or may not be randomized. But if you fail, you reset your progress all the way to the start, and you lose all of your temporary buffs that you were collecting along the way. What if The Legend of Zelda had a rogue-like dungeon? Think the Master Sword Trials, but randomized. And there are so many ways to fit a rogue-like dungeon into the lore, but I digress. The next thing that could fix the next Legend of Zelda would be new playable modes / situations / events that break up the monotonous gameplay. So here's what I mean by that. In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, you play your first segment of the game where it teaches you the mechanics of the game. You get your powers that you'll use in the game, and that's it. You use this same style of gameplay, this formula that you have learned for Link in every circumstance. But in past Zelda games, Twilight Princess for instance, there were so many different spots where the gameplay was broken up to introduce something urgent or just different. Like, spoiler alert for the game, sorry, but there is a moment in the game where you have to save Midna's life. She's on your back dying. You have to race to the castle. Or when you have to do the escort mission for the dying Zora Prince. Or when you have the duels on the bridge leading to the most kick-ass shot of Link in the entire franchise to date. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom do have some of these broken up modes of gameplay, but normally they're related to maybe a side quest or something like that. I would like to see a bit more grandeur of a concept being enacted for maybe the main story or something along those lines. Number 7. We need active companions to make a return. I'm talking Navi from Ocarina of Time, I'm talking Midna from Twilight Princess, I'm talking the King of Red Lions from Wind Waker, I'm talking Fi from Skyward Sword. For most of the most popular Zelda games out there, Link has a companion. This companion character gives advice, comments on things, tells Link what to do, reminds him what his current status is. Again, to reference a game that enacts this very concept in a very well thought out way, albeit I'm not the biggest fan of this character, Genshin Impact's Paimon. That's an open world game that has a bunch of quests and different things that you can do, but Paimon follows you around everywhere and comments on everything and doesn't stop. I'm not saying the character has to be annoying. I'm just saying that it would be nice to have a companion character. And here's another element to that. What if you could choose your companion character? What if there were a bunch of choices like the older companions from the Legend of Zelda franchise, Midna, Navi, Fi, and you could choose which one of them you wanted to explore the world with, and each of them had unique things they would say, and unique pieces of dialogue, prompting you to really try each of them out, and different relationships with Link, or you could choose to have none of them, and just go it alone, without anybody talking in your ear. I think everybody would be a fan of that idea, Nintendo. Number 8. New or old lore. Now, if that sounds confusing, good. The reason why I said that is because this would be the only way to appease everybody in one fell swoop, and all it takes, Nintendo, if you're listening, is to make a choice. Either A, connect the lore from the next Zelda game to the franchise, not connecting all the pieces, but leaving pieces to be connected that makes sense, or B, don't connect anything at all. Do something new entirely. Have the only reference to previous Zelda games be the existence of Link and Zelda. Choose one or the other of these approaches to the story and lore of the next game, but do not sacrifice a good narrative trying to do both. And honestly, personally, I'm leaning more towards the side of do something new entirely. I mean, it's very obvious, isn't it? Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom aren't even connected to the timeline. They've already set the building blocks up to separate the next Zelda game entirely from everything that came before. So honestly, I think they should. Number 9. I believe everybody would benefit from the appearance of a new villain. The Zelda series will most likely never come out from under the shadow of Ganon. He's iconic, he's big, he's scary, he's beautiful. We love him, but I'm gonna level with you here. Ganon, or Ganondorf as a character, is now generic in every way. In the first place, he's not just one character anymore. He's multiple. He can reincarnate as another version of himself, so therefore it's not Ganondorf, it's a Ganondorf. And secondly, and this one is a bit more factual, Ganondorf doesn't have to have a backstory. He can just show up and be, I hate Hyrule. I want to take everything for myself because that is what a king must do. Which is the most generic villain thing I've ever heard. So let's not ruin his legacy or do something with it that would piss anybody off, let's just introduce a new villain. New villains have been introduced in the series before, and typically they go over pretty well. You look at me right now and tell me you did not absolutely adore Girahim. I know you did. Girahim was amazing, and Girahim's relation to Demise was amazing. Everybody loved Zant. Of course, some people have complaints about how he turned out at the end, but everybody loved Zant. Even the non-canon villains, like, what's-his-face, Astor. He was pretty frickin' cool. Malladus, Vati, Yuga, the list goes on. And I think that everybody would benefit from a new Zelda villain. Number 10. The return of underwater gameplay. Honestly, I don't think I even need to go into this all that much. Enough said. I think everybody, whether a defender or an attacker of the current state of Zelda games, misses underwater traversal. It was one of the weirdest things to remove from the era of the wild, although everybody understands why. It's simply because it would have been too much for the development team. But I don't know about you, I would trade probably a good half of the map of Hyrule if it meant good old-fashioned underwater puzzles, dungeons, traversal, you name it, combat, whatever. Bring it back, Nintendo. Bring it back. Number 11, I don't have enough fingers for any of the other ones. Meaningful items. Listen, for you new Zelda fans, there used to be meaningful gadgets and spells and tools back in the day that Link could use. I'm talking the shovel, the spinner, ball and chain, Pegasus boots, the power bracelet, magical rods, masks, the hook shot, the gust bellows. Each of these served to enhance the gameplay, unlock new areas, new methods of combat, methods of traversal, you name it, and were all replaced for Link's arsenal of sandbox powers, like Magnesis or Ultra Hand. But I think especially if Nintendo were to do what I was talking about earlier and remove Link's Spider-Man crawling abilities, that it would be a very welcome addition, especially for traversal. And think about the musical instruments. Oh man, Link used to have such cool musical instruments in addition to the ocarina. In Majora's Mask, he had a guitar, he had drums, he had a bagpipe things. In Skyward Sword, he had a harp. In Twilight Princess, he could howl. In Wind Waker, he had the Wind Waker, which was a baton that could conduct the notes of the wind. And each of these magical instruments were used for warping, were used for changing night to day or day to night, calling upon a storm, you name it. I think Link should have a musical instrument in the next game, maybe one that he can choose. I think that magic should return. So in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, right? You pick up a fire arrow, you fire that fire arrow, now you have no fire arrows. In the older Zelda games, you learned the ability to magically create fire arrows, and you could fire them out there so long as you had arrows and magic. And bringing magic back would open the door to all sorts of different spells. You could bring back Ocarina of Time style spells like Din's Fire, or you could introduce new ones, like imagine if Link could heal himself with magic power. I find it very hard to imagine the kind of person that would have a problem with this addition in the next Zelda game. Number 12. Bring back empty bottles. Empty bottles were a whole other mechanic that's just not there at all in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. And you can still have your magical unlimited inventory, but bottles were at least one form of inventory management that actually made sense and that nobody had a problem with. You had to choose whether or not you wanted to store a health potion or a magic potion or a potion very expensive that would restore both, or if you wanted to catch a fairy, or back in Ocarina of Time, if you wanted to catch some bugs, or if you wanted to catch a fish, or if you wanted to catch some water. It was an inventory mechanic that was cool, and I think it should be brought back, and also they were powerful enough to defeat Ganondorf. Yeah, bring them back. Number 13, a playable story. You know what I mean by that. In Breath of the Wild, you don't play through the story like we all thought we were going to when we first saw the trailers. No, all of that happened 100 years prior to the game's events. Now, we've all cried over it if we were going to cry over it or not. That's been a long time ago. And it's not that Breath of the Wild's story was not good. It was great. I just did a video covering the Kings of Hyrule, and when I covered Rome Bosphoramas Hyrule, I got sad because it's a really good story, but we didn't get to play through it, and when Tears of the Kingdom came out, they kind of teased us a little bit with Ganondorf being right there in front of Link and Zelda after the events of Breath of the Wild, meaning this is something that's going to be happening as of our control of the characters of the game. And it starts, and you see Ganondorf, and things happen, and then everything already happened in the past, exactly like Breath of the Wild. You do not get to play through it. You do not get to experience any of it. You just find it out again. And if you think about it, the last time that a Zelda game had a story that had events that you actually play through was over 10 years ago in A Link Between Worlds. It's been over a decade. It's time. And speaking of the story, number 14, give us a linear and non-linear combo of gameplay that can actually work. It's a very simple concept that they've been implementing ever since the start, to be honest with you. Think about A Link to the Past. How many non-linear things can you do at any point in the gameplay that just pauses the linear story and doesn't affect its progression? They did the same thing in Ocarina, they did the same thing in Majora's Mask, they did the same thing in Wind Waker, they did the same thing in Twilight Princess, they did the same thing in Skyward Sword, and it's not just Zelda games. Most open world games do this. Oblivion, Skyrim, the Fallout games, even MMOs, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, Elden Ring. This is, however, one that I'm not sure that Aonuma will be very open to. In a recent interview, as you might remember, he stated that he doesn't really want there to be stories in games anymore. And I'm not sure if this was taken out of context or what, but it's definitely a strange take that does kind of make sense given his decisions with the stories in the last few years. He wants there to be a story that players kind of make themselves in a sandbox world. Like I said, it could have been taken out of context, so I'm just going to put a pin in that and not come back to it. But speaking of a create your own concept though, number 15, what if the next Zelda game implemented a diverging storyline? The era of the Wild games have already had multiple endings depending on how many things you completed in the game. What if this was just an evolution of that concept? Again, to reference another game series that does this very well, the Souls series. Elden Ring, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Demon Souls, or heck, the Five Nights at Freddy's games. There are always multiple endings that depend on your choices, even though there's only ever one that's actually the canon ending. It still doesn't matter though, because it feels rewarding to a player to have a different path through the game as another player that was different because of your choices. I'm not saying you should be able to make Link a villain, unless Nintendo really wanted to think outside the box for the next game, but the ability to alter what does or doesn't happen by the game's end might be a very welcome addition. Let the players create their own stories, right? Number 16. We need a lot more enemies. I know that Tears of the Kingdom brought some new enemies into the fold, like the Flux Constructs or the Froxes, or the Gleeoks. I kinda don't want to do this because I'm not that proud of this video, but in a relatively recent retrospective I did about Breath of the Wild, I compared the number of different kinds of monsters that you can encounter in Breath of the Wild to other Zelda games, and I'm just gonna let you have a listen to that. Early game, you get used to fighting any one of these kinds of enemies. The only real difference between their colors is their health pool. Here's a little frame of reference for you. In Breath of the Wild, and I'm gonna refer to my notes here, there are 98 total different enemies. That includes world bosses and all the versions of Ganon as well. But when you cut out the duplicates, like, you know, the multiple colors or the multiple different kinds of the same enemy that are just different elements, you are left with 28 different kinds of enemies in the game. For comparison, in Ocarina of Time, you know, a game that came out 19 years before Breath of the Wild, there were 87 total different enemies in the game, or 64 when you cut out the duplicates. That's well over twice the amount of unique enemies in Breath of the Wild. In Twilight Princess, which came out 12 years before Breath of the Wild, there were 107 total enemies, or 84 unique different kinds of enemies when you cut out the duplicates. That is literally 3 times the amount in Breath of the Wild. But yet my point is, we just need a lot more different kinds of enemies to fight in the next Zelda game. I think this is something that the series set as a standard and then kind of went back on quite a bit because they spent more time developing the map itself in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And it's definitely something that can just be changed. They don't even have to develop a lot of new enemies. Just bring back all the old enemies that we've been missing. Bring back Skulltulas. Bring back Stalfoses. Bring back Tektites. Or make new ones. And obviously, I could go on for a while, but you get the point on this one. Number 17. And this is a technical one, but I would like to see the return of having multiple save files. Listen, this is something that a lot of games are implementing these days, and I don't know that Nintendo will ever go back on, but typically these days, when you download a game, which most people do these days, I haven't bought a physical game in years. I don't even know when the last time is that I bought a physical game. It was probably Breath of the Wild, to be honest. But most people buy digital copies and download them. And when you do download these games, they are linked to your account, not to the console. And so, because of that, these days, a lot of games don't let you have multiple save files. They're linked to your account. You launch that game, it's your one save file. And Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom implement this wholeheartedly. The reason why game companies are doing this is because it is so easy to just generate multiple sales. If you have a family that wants to play Breath of the Wild, and multiple members of that family want to play Breath of the Wild on their own, and you haven't bought the physical version, then you're going to need a separate $60 copy for every single person that wants to play the game. But when Zelda had save files, you were able to re-experience the game without having to erase all of your progress and maybe be a bit more experimental in your next playthroughs. Or share it with friends or family members who wanted to try the game but you didn't want to wipe your game for it. It would be nice to see save files come back. Stay with me here, we're in the last few. Number 18, I think that it could be an entirely new setting. And by that, I mean that wholeheartedly. I mean, it doesn't even have to be Hyrule. Or maybe it does, but it doesn't have to be a game that is about Link saving Zelda from the clutches of whoever anymore. It could be a Gerudo adventure with an entirely different set of characters from the ground up. Maybe they don't mess with the balance of Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf. Maybe this isn't about the Triforce, which, you know, it hasn't been about the Triforce in 10 years anyway. Maybe we need an entire new set of characters for a mainline game. And I know what you're thinking at that point, what is keeping it a Legend of Zelda game? Well, let me raise the question to you. What is keeping it a Legend of Zelda game these days? There's no Triforce. There are no pieces of heart. The things that we do recognize from older Zelda games are all different, like the Master Sword for instance, and everything is weirdly just like a reference and not actually canon to the game. We simply have Link and Zelda that connect it to the other Zelda games. They've been thinking outside the box. It's something I could see happening in the next Zelda game, and it's something that I think would only have a little bit of complaint at first, but once we all knew and understood that it was going to be a completely new story with completely new characters that is somehow otherwise connected to The Legend of Zelda, maybe it's just simply in the same universe, I think everybody would accept it, and everybody would love it, given that the narrative and gameplay are good, of course. Number 19. Listen, this one's gonna sound crazy, but keep thinking about it. We need more mounts for Link. Think about it, in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, you could already go and get multiple horses, but you know what horses have in common? They're all horses. The slowest one and the fastest one are both still horses. What if Link could have a flying mount? Like a loft wing. Maybe he could fly, but it wasn't as fast on the ground, making it more convenient for him to switch from a horse to his loft wing. And what if he had underwater mounts as well? What if he could ride one of those giant seahorses like the ones that we saw in Skyward Sword? Or be tugged by a manta ray? Or a baby Jabu Jabu? And you could further this idea with gear for your mounts that would actually enhance their speed or stamina and customize their colorations and patterns and whatever. I think that would be a huge W for everybody. Before we get to number 20, which is going to be my last point that I'll talk about, I'm going to give an honorable mention. I think that we need to rework the art style from the ground up. I think that Zelda has spent a long time being very cartoony, ever since the prevalence of super cartoony graphics in like The Wind Waker, which, if you'll recall, had such a bad backlash over its graphical style that in Twilight Princess, which was going to be Wind Waker 2 as according to the files of the game, they completely overhauled it and made it the most realistic looking Zelda game. And people really liked it. It was very popular. It was rated T. And I get that Nintendo is not necessarily trying to not market to kids anymore, but they need to remember that a huge portion of their fans are my age or older. That is to say, within the 20 to 40 age zone. We don't mind realistic looking graphics. In fact, we probably would enjoy it quite a bit. But here's the other thing about that. Having realistic graphics in a video game requires better hardware, to be honest, which is kind of why they decided to go with the graphical style that they did for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. That's the only way to pull off those vast fields of grass. But hey, depending on whether or not you believe it, apparently we might be getting the Switch successor this year. So let's see what that's all about, right? I swear, if it's just like, here's the Switch OLED Part 2, a little bit better of a screen and a little bit better speakers, I think I'm gonna riot. But anyway, the last thing that I think would be a W across the board that would make The Legend of Zelda better than ever. Number 20. We need an actual crafting system. Listen, cooking in the era of the wild feels really good, but I think we could enhance cooking. I think we could bring crafting as a whole to crafting gear, repairing your armor, crafting weapons. Imagine that cooking returns, but it's not just 5 ingredients that go into whatever dish you're trying to make. Not all ingredients are created equal, right? Why should a whole-ass turkey take up the same ingredient slot as salt? What if we had 2 protein sections and 2 or 3 like filler sections and then like 2 or 3 garnishes, each of which we could fill or not fill, that would enhance multiple kinds of status effects for Link upon consumption. Giving us a system like this would enable us to get as complex with it as we wanted or as simple with it as we wanted, which is very important and telltale good game design. And like I was mentioning, there are so many materials to pick up in the worlds of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Why can we not craft stuff with this? We can already slaughter enemies by the dozens and break their horns off and stick them on weapons and stab other enemies with them. Why not take their bones and craft armor? Or use it as material to repair our armor. Between fusion and cooking as of Tears of the Kingdom, the elements are there for a really, really well thought out and intuitive and immersive crafting system. I think they just need to go that extra step and implement them all. And there you have it. My complete list of 20 things that Nintendo should implement to fix The Legend of Zelda once and for all, for everybody across the board. Let me remind you that Nintendo does listen to people, specifically YouTubers. You know how much influence the Zonai had in the story of Breath of the Wild? About a iota. You know how much they had in Tears of the Kingdom? Actually, just everything was Zonai. I guarantee you, that was probably because of all the chatter we had about the Zonai on YouTube. So if you want anything in this video implemented in the next Zelda game, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, comment below with what you want to see. More interaction on this video will get it spread around more. So let's see what we can do. And at the very least, it'll get it spread around to other Zelda fans just like you and me who will begin this conversation anew, and who knows, maybe we could make some of this stuff happen. Or hit me up on Instagram and let me know over there.